Woo. Come on. Yeah. 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 Huh? Come on. What I'm talking about. Says we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. Yeah, we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. I said we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. We all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. Says we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. Say we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. Come on. I said we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. We all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. We all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. Come on, y'all.
And that ain't no crime. And that ain't no crime.
Woo. Come on. Yeah. Yeah. Huh? Come on. What I'm talking about. Says we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. Yeah, we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. I said we all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. We all do better when we all do better. You can't get better than that. We all do.
Is this Masterpiece Theater? Wrench, are you Masterpiece Theatering us?
Wait, by the way, are we live? Are we live right now?
We are.
Hello.
Yep.
Hello.
Yes.
It is us. Welcome to another Friday night hangout with this bunch of weirdos.
What's the Masterpiece Theater theme? Somebody hum it really quickly because I have other classical music in my head and now I can't.
Yeah, I don't know.
I know. I've had the Bengals Eternal Flame in my head all day.
The only thing I remember is the John from Mystery. And on Mystery, they had the John standing on the wall moaning, oh, oh. That's all I remember. My pops used to watch Mystery all the time. I'd be like, what in the... Oh, he's watching Mystery. Okay, good.
All right, here we go.
Dan, you were right. You were humming the right thing. It's Vivaldi's Spring.
No, that's not Masterpiece Theater though, right?
Isn't it?
I only remember Monsterpiece Theater with Cookie Monster.
Oh no!
No,
hold on.
That's CBS This Morning. I'm almost certain that's CBS. What was it? The one that used to come on Sundays.
Oh, Meet the Press.
No.
Really?
Before Meet the Press. Before Meet the Press was the one with the like the little news bits ones with Charles Osgood.
There are a bunch of conflicting themes here.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's all. I know.
I think we've uncovered a real controversy here, and once again, Gangstagrass bringing you the important issues of today.
Yo, Charles Cosgood was a G, homie. Shout out to Charles. Love that. Bro.
How about I ask this question early in the game here? What were we supposed to talk about?
Yeah, right.
We've never gotten around to talking about our earliest jobs. Except for tonight with
Wow, that was a while ago, man.
That's so long ago.
Can I randomly just pull up different recordings of this theme throughout tonight because it's just going to be bugging me otherwise.
Yeah, the topic of conversation will be the Lindsey Buckingham of this.
Yeah, it really was. It really will be.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that, Lindsey Buckingham.
And instead of the "What's Up with That" theme song, we come back to the Masterpiece Theater theme song.
Full support.
Talking about some jobs, yeah.
I was enjoying the early jobs convo that me and Sleeves and Dolio had a few weeks back. So we could get back into that.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I got more early job stories.
My first job, I didn't get my first job till I was in college. And I worked at the Nittany Lion Inn. I was a banquet server for 4 years. And it was wild. It was really, really goofy.
What's different about a banquet server? Are you serving people banquets?
Yes, serving them entire banquets at one time. No, so banquet servers, like instead of waiting tables, which they also had, there was a restaurant there too. Well, banquet service is like you come in, and we did a lot of weddings, right? So everybody knows what they're going to eat, that kind of thing, and you just sort of bring out the food as opposed to taking orders. Every now and again, we would do that. But most of what we were doing was just clean up. That was the place I was worked at where the lady stabbed me in the hand with a fork.
No.
Hear about it. Let's hear.
Yo, I'm clearing salads, right?
This is what the whole point of this is about. To hear this happen.
So I'm clearing salads, right? Because the salad course had finished, and I'm clearing everybody's salads. This lady's running her mouth, whatever. And she had like a crouton and like a piece of lettuce left on the plate. And she's running her mouth, and doesn't even look at my direction. She just it has the fork in her hand and jabs it right here in my hand as I'm going to pick up the plate. And I went like this. And I just walked out the room, and I called my the guy that was running the joint right at that point. I was like, yo, somebody else got to take this table. Otherwise, this lady will get punched in the back of her head. She just stabbed me with a fork, bro. This lady, and the rest of the table looked at her like, bitch.
Wow.
And at the end of the night, like 4 people were like, we are so sorry about her. Like, I was like, look, it's cool, but just know that her whole life almost changed. So she almost spent the rest of her life in a coma because she almost punched her right in the back of the head, man. I was like, I did this. I went in the back. I was like, yo, that bitch just stabbed me with a fork, son. It was like, Rand, what are you talking about? And like one of the other servers saw what was going on. They came back like, yeah, she just really did just stab Rand with a fork. And so we switched a couple tables. I was on the other side of the room. I was like, nope, not going back over there because she gonna wind up dead. Yeah,
but you said she didn't look.
So didn't say a word didn't look at me. Or she was just talking and jammed and it wasn't like she was trying to get that last crouton because my hand was on the edge of the fork, the edge of the plate. And so the plate was like, if the plate was here and my hand is on the edge, because they had trained that you got to reach around so you're not in anybody's face and nothing. Yo, she was like, gah! I was like, I did not. Like, did I just get stabbed in the head? And I had a tray in my other hand because I was putting the plates on the tray. So I went to grab that last one, and she was like, what? But I was a professional. I didn't drop my tray.
Yeah.
I held it up. I was like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me just get out of here before I murder this lady.
I cannot wait to make a TV movie of this.
Bro, it was the wildest. That whole spot was wild. There was a wedding there, and one of the Baldwin brothers, I think it was Billy Baldwin, was there at the wedding because he knew somebody. And this was back in the day.
Was it a very religious wedding?
No, they was wilding the fuck out. This is before who's the youngest? The one that Daniel's the old crazy one that was on.
I thought Billy was the really religious one, no?
he eventually got. Was that him that got religious?
I don't know.
I don't know, but in the
I know
TV
nothing about
movie,
this.
all of the Baldwins are going to be there, and they're going to be at this table. And
Well,
then-
at this wedding, like Billy was acting a fool. This was I didn't work this one. He was acting a fool, and like the girl that was running it on our staff, like when they were all dancing and shit, like he picked her up and put her on his shoulder and all this bullshit. I was like, "Are you kidding?" Yo, that place was wild as hell.
Mhm.
It was wild as shit. The general manager was a guy named Jim Purdom. Jim Purdom, everybody was scared of Jim Purdom. I wasn't worried about that motherfucker. He was cool, whatever. And I watched him curse out his second in command one night. Yo, he had, because this dude was a chump. He was a real chump, his second in command. And Jim cursed this boy. He was like, "Mike, what the fuck is going on out here? Like, I can't believe any of this shit's going on." I was like, "Oh, damn, son. You just got," and Mike was like, well, Jim, we're sorry that it went through. He was like, "I don't want to hear that shit, Mike." I'm like, "Damn, son." Yo, it was hilarious, bro. It was hilarious. That's where I got cool with the president of the board of trustees of Penn State University. That was my homie, my man Jesse Arnell. He was a good dude. So I used to chat with that boy all the time. You know what I mean? And he would come in the building and people were like, "Oh, how are you, Mr. Arnell?" Like people would like change their whole life around. Like, "Oh, Mr. Arnell, how you doing?" I'd be like, "Jess, what's good, homie?" They were like, "What? Hold on. How does he? What?" I used to ball with his son. We used to play ball together. His son Paulo. Penn State was the wildest.
I want more excuses for you to do that voice. The obsequious voice when people like change how they're talking around people of power.
Yo, they would really do that. Like they would people that thought they was important would act like their whole life would be like, "Oh, it's Jesse Arnell. Hello, Jesse. How are you, sir? How you doing, sir?" Like, yo, this dude, yeah, I mean, guess what? He just came out of the bathroom taking a shit, just like everybody else. Relax. He's not that impressive. He was a cool dude, though. That was my man. Shout out Jesse Arnell.
Hey, on that note, I think we actually got to our topic early, and our guest is here.
Yeah, we're gonna turn it to our guest in a second and ask him what his first job was, because it probably was not driving the Mars rover. He probably had other jobs.
It was a high school internship, and he drove the Mars rover for that, I think.
He drove the Moon rover first.
Hey,
Oh, what's up? It's us.
come on.
Aw, that's
I'm
so
confused.
sweet.
And that's perseverance.
But if that's us,
Oh, hi, y'all. How's it going?
Nice shirt.
I feel bad. Now I gotta go get my vest with the NASA patches.
I think
Right on.
Steve
No, I'm
should
gonna
tell the people who that is.
That is Gangstagrass. So hang on, I'm going to switch my virtual background.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I'll hang on to switch my virtual background. So
Steve should tell the
that-
people who you is.
that is hi everybody. Hi, my name is Scott. My name is Scott Maxwell, and I am was a Mars rover driver. I was one of the original 8 Mars rover drivers for the Spirit and Opportunity missions, and I also drove the Curiosity rover before I quit that lousy job. So in this picture behind me here, this is a picture from your favorite band. When they came out and we were able to give them all a tour, or most of them anyway, a tour of JPL. And that piece of hardware behind us right there, that is the actual Perseverance rover that is on Mars today.
Yep.
Nice.
Awesome. That was an awesome day.
They can't see it in that picture, but when nobody was looking, I slapped a sticker on the bottom of it. No.
My favorite thing to walk around with when people were talking about it being on Mars, I was just like, oh, that thing? Oh, yeah, we saw that thing. I got pictures.
It was over, man. It was
I have
definitely
selfies
fun.
with more spacecraft.
That's a cool shirt there, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I think I got you beat. I got this vest, and it has on it over here. You can see
Nice.
it's NASA, and over
Nice.
here, maybe I'll bring it up close. It says,
The stars are calling and we must go. Nice. Nice. I see you. You have made good use of your JPL store purchases. Good for you, man.
"Oh yeah, oh,
Yeah.
Dan, you wear that while you watch Star Trek, right?
I mean, I should. What I really want is that Picard jacket from, you guys know what I'm talking about, from Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra.
Of course.
Yeah,
The jacket. The coolest part of that is not the idea of a civilization that communicates entirely through shared metaphor. Although, as a meme lord, I would love that. But no, the coolest part of that is that freaking jacket, man. Picard is just like business casual the whole way, like knife fighting an invisible monster, and just with the jacket. Oh, such a jacket. Thanks for joining us, Scott. Today we've asked you on to talk about Jean-Luc Picard's jacket from...
Dan, you are much more interested in people's fashion choices than I ever realized.
Oh, yeah. You didn't know that about me? Looking at me the first time.
Dude, that's awesome.
Anyway, cool shirt. That was my point.
Thank you. Shirt. Thank you very much. I got it direct from y'all on the day.
That's right. That's right. Because we come bearing gifts if you want to give us tours of extremely cool places and show us stuff that nobody else gets to see.
Like Mars.
That's right. That's real. That's real.
I got to ask you, Scott, what's going on with that Mars rover?
Well, very exciting things are going on with that Mars rover. So as you might know, Perseverance rover carried with it to Mars the first Martian helicopter. So first opportunity to do powered flight on another planet. First powered flight on Earth was in 1903, Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, and here we are just a little more than 100 years later, and we're doing our first powered flight on another planet. So they've unstowed the helicopter beneath the rover, and it's sitting there with the legs out, and they haven't dropped it off yet, but very soon they'll be dropping off that helicopter and then driving away from it just a little bit as quickly as possible so the sunlight can actually come down on it and charge up its solar panels. And then there will be a period of checkout with the helicopter, and soon after that, they will actually fly that helicopter for the first time on Mars, and the rover will be taking video of it while it flies. It's got a little drone, like fly up and like kind of scout out the path where the rover might go and take pictures, and we'll just kind of see how that all works.
Now, I'm guessing you guys are predicting weather up there because it's got to be able to fly in good weather, right?
Yeah, well, the weather on Mars, I mean, well, there are dust storms, but it's not quite as variable as it is here on Earth. Yeah, but yeah, like all systems are go for the powered flight, and I am personally, I'm really looking forward to that. I can't wait to see that. That's an amazing thing. I was astonished that a helicopter can even work on Mars. Its atmosphere is like 0.5% of Earth's, 0.6% of Earth's, a super thin atmosphere. It's practically vacuum, and the idea that you can get a helicopter to fly there, even one as light as that, just astonished me. But they've tested it on Earth. They've put it in a vacuum chamber and pumped the air pressure down to be comparable to Mars, and we're able to fly the thing in that vacuum chamber. And we've got more gravity than they do, so apparently it works. I'm just astonished by it.
How much lighter is the gravity over there?
0.38 Earth gravity. So so that's your Martian diet. Go to Mars and you weigh less than 40% of what you do on Earth. If you're trying to shed a few pounds, that's the way to go.
So that's why John Carter was able to jump.
That's right. So the gravity is more lighterer, if you'll excuse my scientific terminology. The gravity is more lighterer than the atmosphere is heavier.
Yeah.
So while we're on the tech,
are you sure you don't have physics training?
Oh, I do.
Yeah, right.
I do.
We all do. We go to Fermilab every time we can.
I actually have a radio control helicopter, so I am like you in that way.
Oh, cool.
We're the same.
You do the same job. Same stuff.
I tell you though, I crashed that thing. I would want to be able to pick it back up again and fix it. So very brave, like flying a helicopter that you can't really fix.
Right. Yeah. Well, like all our Martian vehicles, it has autonomy, so it actually does its own flying. We don't sit there with a joystick, but that in a lot of ways it makes it worse because nobody's there to pull the plug or let it crash land, or as you say, put it back together when it falls down and shatters into a million pieces.
And when it starts trying to assert its independence, I don't have to listen to you anymore. Man.
So on the tech specs, one of the questions that we were talking about, I don't know, some time ago, and I remember we wrote it down. We were like, okay, we're going to ask Scott about this, is how long does it take to get the signals from Earth to Mars, and what's the variation in that depending on, where we all are in relation to each other?
Yeah, you asked a great question. So as you know, Earth and Mars are very far apart in the night sky, so it takes a long time for the signals to get back and forth. That's why you're asking this question. The absolute minimum that it ever is when the two planets are as close to each other as they get in the night sky is 3 minutes one way. Absolute bare minimum is more than 3 minutes one way. And then when they're as far apart as they get in the night sky, when they're on opposite sides of the sun, the distance between them is about 22 light minutes. Right now, we're kind of in between those. When Perseverance landed, it was around 11 minutes, and right now it's about 15. So the planets are kind of like drifting farther and farther apart from each other, and they'll get to the point where they're on opposite sides of the sun. That's solar conjunction, so there's a giant flaming ball of gas in the way that is not Rush Limbaugh, but is an actual material object. Thank you. And it makes communication impossible, so you get a physics-enforced break, holiday break of a week to 2 weeks, and then the two planets come out from opposite sides of the sun, and that time gets shorter and shorter and shorter.
Oh wow! So there's no communication when the sun is in between. Just forget about it.
That's right. Like theoretically, you can kind of get some signals through, and you can get some signals through when it's kind of on the edge of the sun, but the communication can be kind of garbled. And we don't want to take the risk of something screwing up in just the right way to send a command that's the opposite of the one you meant to send or something like that. So we just kind of stand down for that period. We have a break of between a week and 2 weeks where we just kind of don't do anything with rovers.
Wow, so that's when everybody takes their vacations and everything.
It's a good time to do that. So what I did during the first solar conjunction, because I'm insane, is instead I had this idea for a piece of software that I wanted to write to view images in a cooler way than the tools that we had at the time. So I actually took that time and just went back to my office. It was no other pressure and nothing to do anything because everybody else was gone on vacation. Everybody who had any sense was gone on vacation. And so I sat down and banged out this tool that we used for the rest of the mission that let us kind of more quickly browse images from the rovers.
Neat.
Yeah.
So if you're insane like me, you use your time poorly. But if you're smart, you go to Capri or something during that time instead.
So what is that typically written in?
So I wrote my software in Java. Mostly, but the different software tools on the rovers are written in different pieces of different computer languages. There's the rover driving suite of software that I helped to write. I wrote my part in Java, and the most of the rest of it was written in C++. And the two pieces of software kind of talk to each other through a common language. So they would send messages in a format that they both understood in order to talk to each other. But I also wrote a lot of software on the mission, and other people wrote software on the mission in Perl and Python and lots of other, things that nerdy folks listening in would appreciate. There's scope for a lot of different languages because different languages are good at different things.
Interesting. So before we keep diving in deeper, I feel like we should probably give people a little bit of a sense of your background. So go ahead and tell us.
It's yellow and it's red and it says Scott.
I did that today.
You hooked them up with it.
I made that today.
It was sent to me by this very cool person called Plumes, yeah.
but the original design is all Wrench. That was all Wrench. He just taught me how to do it.
Nice.
So I would love it if you would start from, childhood Scott with whatever dreams you had to your interview, because the story of Scott's interview at JPL is outrageous. And then what your different jobs were over the course of the time, and then maybe tell people roughly what you do now, just so that they know.
Right on. So I can talk about this for a very long time. So please, for the love of God, interrupt me as much as you darn well please. But so I was born in. I was actually born in Florida. My family moved kind of back and forth between Florida and North Carolina. I grew up mostly in kind of rural eastern North Carolina, and it was in an area where, it was, as I said, it was kind of economically depressed, and it was an area where, if you were really lucky, you would grow up and you would get a job working in a bank or something like that. That was kind of the pinnacle. And I'm not putting that down in any way. It's it's honest work and so on. But I kind of would watch TV. So the inspiration for me when I was growing up was Carl Sagan's program Cosmos. And I still remember to this day, we had this tiny little black and yellow case, black and white TV set that would beam back these images of Carl Sagan talking about other planets and images of the Voyager space missions that at the time were going out to Jupiter and Saturn and elsewhere in the solar system for the very first time. And these images were kind of coming through my TV, and they were wow, that's really cool stuff. I'll never get to do anything like that. because I live in this place where like, the people are like, there's me and there's this, giant invisible glass wall. And then there's like the people who do stuff like that. And so grew up, got a degree and got double majored in computer science and English. So that was weird. When I was getting my degree at my university, they had to approve, if you wanted to double major, you had to get approvals from the heads of both departments. And the English, the head of the English department called me in his office, and he's like, I've heard good things about you from your professors. I know you can do this and everything. I'm happy to sign the form. I just wanted to see the guy who was double majoring in computer science and English, because nobody had ever done that before there. So anyway, went off to grad school at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and I was getting a master's degree. And my plan at the time was to like become, a college professor in computer science with like the tweed jacket and the leather patches on the elbows. And like, that was kind of my plan for my life. But I got about a year into grad school and realized that like, that just didn't really fit me anymore. I'd had cancer about a year before that and had, kind of escaped from that. And was realizing that kind of my priorities had shifted and I wanted to go out in the world and do real stuff. So I started looking through the college job board, and, they had lists of, oil companies and giant monopolistic software companies and all these things that were like interviewing people. And I'm kind of like sitting there scrolling through the list of software companies and people that are coming to hire people. And I saw JPL on the list. And I'm like, oh my God, JPL, are you kidding me? The Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where like they made Voyager and they sent it into space and they do like these amazing things that I was reciting the whole history. And I'm like, they'd never want me. And I kept on scrolling. And I had somebody I knew had to tell me, no, you should like go. You should just go to the interview. Like you don't even have to get hired. Just go to the interview. So I went to the interview with like no expectation that they were going to hire me. Absolutely no thought of that at all. And the interviewer, Susan Kurdick, says to me, why do you want to work for JPL? And man, I just like lit up and I was like, JPL, are you kidding me? What a great place. And they've done all this stuff, this exciting stuff. And here's the things they found at Jupiter and blah, blah. And little did I know that the thing they were looking for most of all was enthusiasm. So it turns out that like worked really well for me. So they bring me out there for an interview. To my great astonishment, they actually wanted to interview me and they were going to fly me out to California for the interview. So it's a January day in 1994, and I'm walking out like to the airport. I get out of the car to like walk across like the parking lot into the airport, and it's so cold that the weather advisory on the radio had said that exposed skin could begin to suffer signs of frostbite in 30 seconds, right? And if you've ever like walked across terrain like that, you know that like you don't want to be outside for more than 30 seconds apparently, because I don't want to get frostbite, but also you don't want to hurry across like a thick covering of ice, right? So you want to go slow. So I have that, like that's all what's going on. And this hadn't happened yet, but on the way back, it was so cold. I stopped through in Detroit, and it was so cold on the way from Detroit to Illinois that the plane got 2/3 of the way and the engine started freezing up in midair, and they had to turn around and go back. So it's like that kind of cold. And I don't like cold weather, right? I don't like any of this. So I get off the plane in California, and it's like 70 degrees, and it's sunny and beautiful. And I'm like, I don't care what happens. If they offer me a job, I am taking it. Like I gotta get into this. So with one thing and another, I got some delays, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning before I get back to my hotel room and actually get to sleep. And I got to get up at 6 o'clock the next morning for the interview. And at 4 something in the morning, I get awakened by my hotel room, which is doing this. And like, I don't know. Like I knew right away that it was an earthquake, but the thing is, like, I'd never been to California before, and for all I know, this is perfectly normal. Like maybe this happens every night. I don't know. And I've been joking with some friends about like, maybe I'll be there for a big earthquake or something. I don't know. So I did something that seemed like a good solution at the time at 4:30 in the morning when I'd been sleeping for 2 hours, which is I get up and I look out the front of the hotel, and I'm like, if I see people running out into the street, this is probably really bad. And otherwise it's normal. And I didn't see anybody running out the front door into the street. So I'm like, well, I guess this is perfectly normal. And I go back to bed. And I didn't realize until the next morning when I was getting up and like ironing my suit and stuff and getting ready for the interview that no, the Northridge quake is not normal for Southern California. That's like this huge magnitude 7 point something earthquake in California. So the day of my interview. So I go into JPL anyway because I'm out there for the interview. And meanwhile, on the other side of Los Angeles from me is Susan Kurdick, who had interviewed me for the job originally and had like brought me out for the interview. And Susan, like schematically, let's see if I can do this. JPL is here, Susan is here, and the earthquake happens here. So she's got to like route around like all these broken, burning freeways and things just collapse in flames to like get to me to do the interview, because Susan herself, like the earthquake is a force of nature. And she's like, I'm not going to let a silly thing like an earthquake stop me. I'm bringing this guy up for an interview. I got to go see him. And so her take was like, if he still wants a job after that, we're hiring him. And I did, so they did. So that's how I ended up at JPL.
Yeah. Okay, so first
that
of
ain't
all,
fate. I don't know what is.
Yeah,
Right? It was destined, as you say.
you're a wonderful human being. I ain't going nowhere with you, cuz. Nowhere.
Yeah.
Nah, bro.
What I want to know
Your
is how did
plane
you,
almost froze to death. No.
I just want to know, how did you cause the earthquake?
But he made it though. He made it.
Look, as badly as I wanted to work at JPL, if I'd known that was all it took, that's what I would have done.
You know,
But as it is, I
you're-
just got lucky. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Lucky me.
So what,
then,
yeah, what did you start
sorry,
out
go
doing?
ahead.
No, go on. I was going to ask what you started out doing, but I think that's what you're about to say. So
I
go on.
gotta say,
You go on.
I commune with you on that, not knowing what an earthquake is, because I was in one in Washington, D.C., and everything just like started shaking and there was a drilling noise. I'm like, is this weird? I did the same thing. I looked out the window and I saw people running outside, and I was like, oh, this is weird. This is weird.
I was in California during that earthquake. I missed that one entirely.
Yeah,
So-
that was a good one.
The thing that should have occurred to me is like, it seemed like a good plan at the time, again, to my sleep-addled brain, but what didn't occur to me is like, the other people here are also staying in hotels, and maybe they haven't been in California before either, and maybe they're doing the same thing that I'm doing, and since I'm not running out in a panic, they're not running out in a panic, right? And we should all be running out in a panic.
Everybody waiting for the first person to run out. Yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, it's hello, fellow earthquake survivor. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So once I was at JPL, I started out working on a thing called the multi-mission ground data system, which is a piece of software that like interprets the telemetry that are sent back from all the spacecraft. So all the spacecraft that are sending us back data, they send it back in a common format, and then you can write one piece of software that will like decode it and display it to the spacecraft operators. And so this is really cool because it gave me a chance to be like a little tiny piece of a whole lot of missions. So I got to be in the room when they were hooking up the first in the test bed when they were hooking up the first test pieces of the Cassini spacecraft, the ACS and the GDS, to like talk to each other. And I was like sitting there running the console, running the software to like do that. And that was a major mission that went to Saturn and died in a fiery death a few years back, but was sent us back these gorgeous images of Saturn. I got to be like a tiny little part of that. And I got to be a tiny little part. The really cool part of this was part of what we did was writing software that was used by the operators at the Deep Space Network radio telescopes around the world that JPL uses to talk to and from its spacecraft. And because of that, I got to go out to the DSN facilities and like learn some of their job. And while I was doing that, one of the things I got to do, I got to travel to Australia, which was nice, but I also got to set up a communication pass for Voyager 2. So in this very, very small way, I got to grow up and become part of the mission that had inspired me to get involved in spaceflight in the first place.
Amazing.
So I had several years of experiences like that. It was wonderful.
Plus,
and then,
if you're a Star Trek guy, you're involved in DSN and Voyager.
Oh, damn! You're so right. Nicely done.
Pretty good.
I applaud you, sir. And I am, right, because I grew up with this is I left this part of the story out, but this is what I grew up with. I mean, I grew up dreaming about science fiction, and I caught the space travel bug from my dad, and like it was a huge part of my life. And Star Trek was part of that. Star Trek was the thing that my dad and I had in common after the divorce, when he and I didn't have too much else in common. It was kind of part of how we connected. So it was important to me in that way as well.
Yeah, and if that way you got it from your dad, that makes you the next generation.
Hi, pal. Oh, awesome.
You got a lot of Star Wars in your star sign, man.
You just said Star Wars.
Yes, he did.
It's okay. It's okay. Let it go.
It's okay.
It's a good
It's
thing.
okay.
I said,
It's okay.
I'm sorry. I meant to say Star Trek.
It's okay. It's all
I'm
basically the
sorry.
same.
I'm sorry, guys.
I want you to know this, Pharaoh.
Right?
If that had happened on my other podcast, Kennedy would have found you and murdered you. He would have found you and murdered you to death.
No, that's really sweet, Scott. That's really a meaningful thing.
Yeah.
So 1997, actually about 1996, a person I knew when I was working there comes up to me and says, "Hey, do you want to work on Mars Pathfinder?" And I'm like, I don't know what Mars Pathfinder is, and I don't know what the Sojourner is that you're talking about. I don't really want to do that. I'm like involved in this other thing, and I want to keep doing what I'm doing. And July 4th, 1997, Mars Pathfinder spacecraft lands on Mars, and the Sojourner rover rolls off of it. And it's like a little, 6-wheeled microwave oven, basically like exploring Mars. And I'm like, I blame you for such a bad sales job, because if you told me you were going to take a microwave oven and strap 6 wheels to it and drive it around on Mars, and that I want to be part of that, I would have said yes. So that opportunity kind of passed me by. And a couple of years later, Brian Cooper, who had been the rover driver on Sojourner, was looking to write a bigger and better version of his rover driving software. And he asked his friend, Jeff Bizadecki, if Jeff wanted to work on it with him. And Jeff was like, well, no, I want to do something else for this next mission that's coming up that's originally was planned to be a refly of Pathfinder. But who I did work with a few years ago who would be really cool was this guy named Scott Maxwell, because I had worked with him when I started at JPL. So he recommended me, and I went over to Brian. And Brian liked me enough to hire me to do some work on the rover. But Brian, I think, was kind of a little worried about the idea that like people who wanted to work on him on this stuff were like all in it because they wanted to be rover drivers. And he wanted to let people know that there was no guarantee that they were going to end up being rover drivers. And so he would tell me all the time. So y'all have obviously seen the movie The Princess Bride. And the part of The Princess Bride where Wesley is talking about when he was a pirate in training sort of thing. And they were like, good night, Wesley, good work. I'll most likely kill you in the morning. It was kind of like the JPL funding equivalent of that. So Brian would tell me every day that like, hey, you're doing a great job. I like the software you're writing. We only have funding for you for a year, and you're kind of like out after that. And he would kind of tell me that, pretty much every day. And then he kind of like slowly backed off that. And after a while, he was kind of telling me that every week, and then like every month. And then it just kind of like went away, and he stopped telling me that, which I took to be a good sign. And so we like kept going, and we were going to, we were working on this mission that was going to be a refly of Mars Pathfinder. And that mission got scrapped for complicated reasons and rolled into the mission that became MER. And so time was passing, and they were, talking, they were kind of like coming up with a list of people who were going to be rover drivers on the mission. And they put out a list, and they had like, there were like 8 slots, and they put 6 names on there, and like none of them was my name. And then they put a 7th name on there, and like that wasn't my name either, but there's one slot that's still open. And so I'm still kind of like holding out hope that like maybe my name will be slot number 8. And then slot number 8 fills up, and it's also not my name. So like all hope is lost. That's a shame, but I can't say Brian didn't warn me from day one that I was going to be a rover driver. And then number 8 comes off the list, and there's like this empty slot on the list again. And I'm like, I wonder. And so one day I'm walking across the lab, walking this way, and Arthur Amador, who's the person who makes the decisions, is walking this way. And I'm like, hi, Arthur, how's it going? Oh, hi, Scott, how's it going? Oh, by the way, hey, I just wanted to let you know, you're going to be one of the rover drivers for MER when we land. And the clouds, this really funny thing happened, which is the clouds opened up, time stopped, and the clouds opened up, and these angels came down and kind of danced around, like they do, kind of danced around, and then they went back up. And when they were gone, Arthur Amador was also gone, but I was a rover driver, and so like, that's how I got the job.
Don't you love it when that happens?
It's only been that one time for me, but that was pretty good.
You move the earth, you open the sky.
I have questions about rover driving.
Absolutely, fire away.
This one is like the how did they, like, if you have a helmet and a seatbelt on?
Well, because of the light time delays, you can put on a helmet and a seatbelt if you want to, but they're not mandatory. They're part of the optional.
One of those like surround video game consoles where you're playing full position with like actual roll bars over you, and it's like moving around.
We do actually have virtual reality helmets, sort of. So we had back in the day, we had these very cool monitors that would like basically blink two images back and forth, so the left image, the right image, blink them back and forth, and they were synchronized to these glasses that you would put on that would kind of fool your eye right into seeing the left image and the right image faster than your brain could perceive. And so you would see the stereo pairs of images that were sent back to the rover. You would be seeing those in 3D. So we did really have that. But the rest of the time, when we're not using the fancy virtual reality style goggles, because of the light time delays that we were talking about earlier, we unfortunately can't drive the rovers interactively, right? That's what I really want, is like you put a video game controller in my hand and I push on the buttons and the rover like goes and does what I tell it to.
Yeah. I'm thinking very like Black Panther, where you're like, where Shuri's driving the car and you're just like the whole thing moving at the same time.
Right.
No,
right. The light delay time, that's 3 minutes minimum one way, right? So
that's correct.
The round trip, you'd send a communication, and then it drives, and it takes however long to do the drive, and then after that, 3 more minutes later, you see what's actually happened.
Right. That would be the absolute best case scenario. But let's talk about why you can't actually drive the rovers that way. So just imagine you were trying to drive your car with that kind of delay, right? So you're trying to back your car out of your driveway and drive it to the grocery store, but interactively, but with that kind of delay. So you turn around and you look out the back window, and you put the car in reverse and you press on the accelerator, and then nothing happens for 3 minutes. And when it does happen, you don't know about it because your windshield doesn't start to update until 3 minutes after that, right? When the data comes back. Like that's the fastest round trip you could possibly get with the rover for interactive loop.
Okay.
And by then you're in the hospital.
Yeah, exactly, right? As one of my colleagues used to say, by the time you see the cliff coming, you've already gone over it. And that's the best case scenario, right? That's with like 3 minutes one-way delay. In the worst case scenario, it goes up to over 20 minutes, right? So we can't drive the rovers that way. In fact, Dan, I'm going to come back to qualify one thing, because you do have an idea that we kind of picked up on in the missions as well. But I'll tell you about kind of what we normally do. So what we normally do is we normally basically plan an entire day for the rover every day. So in the beginning of the mission, as we are in for Perseverance right now, you work on Mars time and you work on the Martian night shift. So while the rover is sleeping overnight, you're planning out its next day. And when the rover wakes up, you're going to beam it a package of images. So at the end of its day, the rover sends you back pictures and other data telling you about the world around it and like what it did for the day. And the rover goes to sleep, and then you go to work. So you take all those pictures and all those images, and you decide, with the science team, what you want the rover to do, and then how you're going to make it do it. And you're busy furiously typing commands into your simulator. So we take all those images that came back from the rover and we build a 3D like video game world that looks like the world around the rover. And now we have our interactive simulation, and you kind of like drive a simulated rover within that world. So that's your video game, wrench. And then when you get the video game version of the rover doing what you want the real rover to do, and you kind of take into account the fact that like the simulator doesn't always know about things like how the soil is going to slip and that kind of thing. When you get the video game doing what you want the real rover to do, we take all the commands that made it do that, and as a team, we look over them twice, because as we were saying, if anything goes wrong, there's nobody there to hit the big red button to stop it and make it work better, or make it not hurt itself. And we go home and go to sleep, and sun comes up in the Martian sky, the rover gets emailed its to-do list for the day, and the rover spends its entire day clocking out that list, and then at the end of the day, it shuts down, sends us back pictures and other data, and the whole cycle repeats. And that's called the daily tactical cycle of operations. And we've been doing that every day continuously, well, with breaks for solar conjunction and even weekends and things like that. But we've been doing it basically every day on Mars since Spirit landed in 2004, January 2004. The thing that you were saying, Dan, that I wanted to pick up on was we did actually experiment for a while with Spirit when we were trying really hard to get some extra distance. We thought, well, what if we could plan 2 drives in a day? And so we built these sequences that would like basically be like little extensions for the drive. And the rover, what we would do for that, the experiment that we tried was the rover would like do a drive in the morning, shut down to recharge, but send us back some pictures and data. And then we would come in and on an accelerated timeline, plan what the drive extension was going to be and send that up for the rover to do for that afternoon. It turns out that we weren't able to like really get things efficient enough to make it better than just letting the rover have a single long drive by itself. So we ended up abandoning that plan, but we did do something like what you're talking about, where we, kind of send it, get a result back, and then try it again in the same day. So obviously, Dan, you should be on the team.
I wasn't gonna say it, but really, I have a very specialized skill set. I did mention I have a helicopter. I know how to. Yeah.
We have a couple of good questions in the Twitch comments.
Right I do want to say, like, I would like to hear those questions, but just quickly to pick up on what Dan was saying. You're saying you have a specialized skill set, and in all seriousness, it takes lots and lots of kinds of people to make a space mission go. It takes like not only different kinds of engineers and scientists, but even looking beyond that, like JPL needs lawyers and it needs people who do the payroll because you can only work for so long, if you can't feed yourself and your family. And there's like all kinds of people who make all kinds of things happen. JPL even has an artist in residence whose job is to like make cool things around the lab for people to kind of inspire them and like be awesome around them. So there really are jobs like that. Even if your particular bent is not for math or engineering, there can still be a place for you in the space program. So I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt, but that's just an important point to make, and
it is.
I think not enough people appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're about to lose Pharaoh.
In the chat room.
We're gonna lose Pharaoh to JPL. He's gonna be the resident fiddler at JPL.
Oh, I would love that. Let's talk about it later.
Fiddling at people. Rusty in the Twitch chat is asking if you are just licensed on Mars for your driver's license, or if that license is good for the solar system.
Is it universal? Yeah.
Well, the great thing about driving rovers on other planets is that there are no cops. So there's nobody there to pull you over to arrest you, right? And you can go as fast as you want to. The rovers don't go very fast; they kind of trundle along very slowly. But there's no speed limits and no cops.
How fast do the rovers go?
The rovers go flat out, absolutely as fast as they go, about 5 centimeters per second, which is about 2 inches per second. So not very fast. The farthest the rovers have ever gone. It is pretty slow. But the reason for that, the engineering reason for that, is that they are trading speed for torque. So the rovers have an enormous amount of strength, and they are able to like haul themselves even over rocks that are fairly large with respect to their wheels. So also they're very power limited, and the new rovers are also really very heavy as well. So there are all kinds of reasons why they go slowly. But the fact that they can go at all is like really the thing, right? It's like the dancing bear. It's not the fact that he's dancing, it's not whether he dances well, it's the fact that he dances at all. And with the rovers, it's the same kind of thing. So the farthest we've ever driven in one sol, that is one Martian day, is a bit over 200 meters. 100 meters is a football field with end zones. So put those together, put two of those together, and that's a little bit farther than that is as far as we've ever driven in one sol. We have, if you are patient, it all adds up, even when you're traveling slowly, just like the tortoise and the hare. And Opportunity is the interplanetary distance record. She has driven more than a Martian, she drove more than a Martian marathon.
Yeah.
So I know that there's a couple other questions in the chat, but since you mentioned Opportunity, I wanted to. So when I first met Scott Maxwell many years ago, long before I knew my dear friends in Gangstagrass, I was truly delighted with the first conversation we had, and one of the things that Scott said in that conversation was, and I quote, "Opportunity is the Paris Hilton of Mars rovers." Please explain.
At long last, we've been building this up for weeks.
We've been teasing this.
This had better be good.
So
yeah, this is important.
All right. At the time, I would have defended that comment, but now I might want to modify that a little bit. So where that comment came from is when the mission started, I was like every rover driver was either on Spirit or on Opportunity. They were on opposite sides of Mars from each other, and the planning was offset by 12 hours, and you couldn't easily swap back and forth between them. And as it turns out, I was on Spirit. And I fell in love with Spirit the way that you fall in love with your first car, only more so because my first car is on another planet. And I also fell in love with Spirit because I identified, awesome. I also fell in love with Spirit because I identified with her. Spirit had come, hundreds of millions of kilometers to another planet. And it turns out that the thing that she had come all that way for, which is evidence of past Martian water, was not there. She landed in the bottom of what we could have, what we thought from orbit was certainly to be an ancient lake bed. And Mars had later come along and filled that lake bed up with lava to a depth deeper than she could dig. So if there was evidence of water there, it was beneath her wheels, where she was never going to find it. And long story short, she had to live much longer than she was ever supposed to live and do things she was never supposed to be able to do, including becoming the first Martian mountaineer, in order to find the evidence of water that she went there for. And I identified with that notion of, and I sort of felt for her and had compassion for that notion of, having to really work for everything you got and really having to, kind of scrabble and kind of make it happen for yourself.
Did she make it all the way out the lake bed?
She made it so she lived in the lake bed. And the lake bed was bigger than she was ever going to drive out of. But what she did in order to find water was she landed there, and we realized that the rocks are the wrong kind of rocks, that they're lava rocks around her. They're not going to have the evidence of water that she came there for. And so we drove over to this big crater, and the hope was that, well, maybe the crater, crater is a place where Mars came up, that space dropped a big rock and dug a big hole for you, much bigger than the rover herself could dig. And maybe down the bottom of that crater, it would go down far enough that there would be evidence of water at the bottom of the crater, and there wasn't. So way off in the hills, way off in the distance, there were these hills called the Columbia Hills for the astronauts in the Columbia Space Shuttle. And Spirit had to and the hope was, maybe the water came up to here and the lava only came up to here, and the hills would represent a point in between, where that had been covered by water but had not been covered up later by lava. And they were too far away for her to get there, but the hope was maybe if she drives and drives and drives, someday eventually she'll be able to take pictures, that from a distance might show evidence of water, kind of thing. And Spirit not only did that, but survived and got all the way to those hills and climbed up to the very tallest of the very top of the very tallest of those hills. And in the process, found evidence of water in Mars. So it turns out that gamble paid off. So that was Spirit's story and the kind of the shape of Spirit's story. And she went on to have more adventures after that, but that was that kind of arc of the story. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, on the other side of Mars, Opportunity, we sent to Meridiani Planum, because Meridiani Planum is a big, fat parking lot. It's just giant, it extends in all directions. Spirit was going to a place with lots of pointy rocks that might actually kill her when she tried to land. In Opportunity, we sent to Meridiani Planum because it had evidence of these water-bearing minerals from orbit, but basically it was a super safe place to land, a big flat zone where she would be able to land and come out safe. She lands, but anybody betting on it before the mission would have bet that Spirit was the one who was going to find water, evidence of water almost right away, and Opportunity would have to work for it. Opportunity lands on Mars, rolls across the surface of Mars inside her protective airbags, lands, falls into a crater, opens up her eyes the first day. The first pictures that she sends back are these laminated rocks that show evidence of water on Mars, right away out the gate. Wow. And the whole science team flocks over to Opportunity because they're that's where the action is. Let's go over to Opportunity and do this thing. And so everybody was giving all this, she just had it really super easy as it turns out. And everybody was giving her all this attention. And meanwhile, on the other side of Mars, her poor twin sister Spirit is having to scrabble and scrape and make everything happen for herself. So this is why I had that week. But Opportunity redeemed herself for me. She certainly went through her own series of struggles and earned her bones in the end. So all is good between Opportunity and me.
I gotta ask you, Scott, real quick. When's your children's story about the Mars rovers coming out? Because I think you've got an arc for both of them.
We can make a song to go with it.
That's a great question. I do actually have a kid's book, but oh my God, that's a great thing. It could be like the Pete the Cat books, right? Where the Rovers are zooming along, telling their story. Don't let anybody distract you from the thing that you came here to do. I think we should get together and make this happen. I like this.
Ooh, yeah.
I'm down.
I do like writing nerdy songs.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting to hear that one from you, Dan. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I mean, I want to just briefly mention that, and then I want to get back to talking about finding evidence of things on Mars. Well, actually, I mean, it's very much linked because, you know, when we met, I thought, well, I mean, everyone has an interesting story to tell, to be fair to everyone, but I really wanted to know, like, what do you think is the most interesting discovery that we've made from these expeditions to another planet? And you had mentioned two things in that conversation, and one of the things was, you know, looking at, for instance, laminated rocks showing evidence of water, or at one point, you know, correct me if I get this wrong, but there was observations that, like, you'd seen like meteor strikes, and observing like the impact crater and everything, you could deduce, here's how hard it hit the surface. Now, that doesn't make sense given the size of the meteor and the thickness of the atmosphere. It should have hit harder in the current thin atmosphere, which means that when it hit, the atmosphere must have been thicker. And so you're showing evidence essentially of climate change over time on another planet, which is helpful.
I don't need to tell the story now. You pretty much just did.
Right. But what gets me is that you said, well, that's interesting, but that's not the thing. That's not the most meaningful, impactful thing. He said, we essentially took a god, what we saw as a god, and we made it into a planet. And I heard that and I thought, okay, that should be a song, especially considering we observed evidence of climate change from a meteor strike was not going to make as good of a song. You know, I'll work on it. I'll work on it next. But so we turned a god into a planet is it's on the docket. I'm working on it. I really want to do justice, and just, you know, putting it out into the world. Like, if Jonathan Colton hears this, you know, I could probably do with a co-write. So we'll see. We'll see. But I find that sort of thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
I just find that sort of thing interesting, you know, and the whole, just what we're doing there, you know, the idea of looking for, I mean, we're kind of just looking to see what we can find, and we're kind of just going because we can, but we're also trying to answer these questions. And there's a question in the chat specifically where Wendy on Facebook is asking whether, you know, she's just wondering, was Mars once on an orbital path that was conducive to Earth-like life conditions, and then maybe at one point in time, and I don't know if this is necessarily feasible, but Mars being struck by a meteor so strong to bump it off its axis and throw it into an orbital path where it is now, which, I mean, I guess is technically possible if you go way far back enough with large debris thrown around. But that sort of opens up the general question. Obviously, Mars, we see evidence that it was once one way and now has changed to be the way that it is. Is that kind of a good summary of a lot of the discoveries there?
That's one very important part of it, and the reason underlying that. So actually, first of all, on the subject of the song, it took us hundreds of thousands of years to turn this god into a place. It's okay if the song doesn't appear immediately. So that's all right. Take your time. It'll be awesome when it comes out. The reason that we're so interested in, like, you know, this climate change happening on Mars, and the fact that Mars used to be very different from what it used to be, is there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is it was not that long ago, you know, it was within a human lifetime, that it would have been intellectually reasonable for a person to say that planetary atmospheres, conditions like that, can't change. And people said that about Earth, that, like, there's no way that, you know, Earth, that we could ever affect the climate of Earth, that, like, those are too big. They can't possibly change. And it's thanks to work like the work that the rovers have done that we find that not only can climates like that change, but we can point you to a planet where it did happen. Like, we know that it happened on Mars. So that's important for its own sake, for what it tells us about this planet. You know, we live on a planet that has, like, a nice thick atmosphere that we like to breathe, and it has, like, lots of water for us to drink. And, you know, we don't want what happened there to happen here. And now this is part of how we know that it can. So that's important for its own sake. It's not what we went there to do, but I would agree that that's a really important result. It's also important because part of NASA's remit, like the reason we're doing all this stuff in the first place, part of NASA's job is to find evidence of life elsewhere in the solar system. Mars was an attractive place to look for that, not only because in planetary terms it's right next door, but also because it has these orbital features that make it look like it had liquid water on the surface at one time. And so going down to the surface and establishing that, like, yes, Mars did actually have pH neutral liquid water flowing across its surface in the past is like one plank that you put in the story, one layer in the rock, if you like, of the story of a habitable environment for past Mars. And then future rovers have built on that, and including up to the Perseverance rover, which is there now, that is now there looking directly for evidence of habitability. But the way that science works is you don't want to just jump right to the end of the game. You want to kind of like systematically put these steps in place in order to build up to it. You had a question, you related this question from Chad about whether Mars might have ever been in a different orbit. I don't know that about Mars. I do know that the solar system, early in its construction, underwent some really violent rearrangement. There's this whole thing about Jupiter kind of wandering around in the, I like to think of it as, Jupiter was angry that it never turned into a star. And so, it's so close, but it couldn't quite make it. And so kind of rampaged around the solar system and threw everything around. And like, that's why, the asteroids are where they are now and so on.
It's amazing.
Yeah, but the solar system did get kind of rearranged because of that. But I don't know the details. However, having said that, Mars is in that habitable zone, and Mars in its distant past, it didn't need to be anywhere different from where it is now. In its distant past, it did have a thicker atmosphere that was like enough to keep water in, and it did have pH neutral liquid water that flowed across its surface. So even if it wasn't in a different orbit, and that would have been well before that anyway, but even if it wasn't in a different orbit, then it was still a planet that could have sustained life. And one of the really great things about asking this question, did Mars have life on it, is once you know that Mars is a place that could have sustained life, either answer you get is profound. If life did exist on Mars, then we can ask, well, what happened to it? Where did it go? Where is it now? And if life didn't exist on Mars, then even though it had a chance to arise there, then you can ask, well, what does that mean? If life had a chance there, but it didn't actually arise there, then what does that mean about how likely it is that we're alone in the universe, that we have, we have each other, we're not alone in that sense, but what is it, what is the likelihood that there is no life elsewhere in the universe? What does that tell us about the odds? Is it 50-50, or is it maybe better or worse than that? But it's a data point in that argument, right? And so either those are the best kind of questions where it doesn't matter what answer you get, it's tremendous, right? It's exciting no matter where it goes.
I saw, I guess there's a couple of competitions like this, I think, where they send out funding or you win funding for projects that are designing habitable housing for Mars. So it seems like there's still a lot of optimism that whatever the questions end up being, that we're heading there. There's optimism that we can make life happen there on Mars. And from what you've gathered so far on Mars, what is there anything pointing in that direction? And also the one that I've got to mention, one of these structures is like a 3D printed basalt structure that I thought was really interesting. I forgot the name of the company, but it seems like
I don't actually know the name of the company, but that idea is the right way to do it. Getting things to Mars is so expensive that you want to make, if you're living there, if you're going to live there, you want to live off the land as much as possible, right? You want to make use of the resources that you have there as much as possible. And so 3D printing things out of the Martian regolith, out of the dirt in Mars, and making habitable structures is the way to do it. You're using local building materials, and then you just have to send the machine that makes it. In connection with the idea of kind of living off the land in Mars, the Perseverance rover has this very exciting science instrument called MOXIE, which is the Mars oxygen something in situ experiment. But basically, it's like condensing oxygen out of the atmosphere. So it's taking in the CO2 and making O2 in the atmosphere. And the idea is, it's not for the rover to breathe because the rover doesn't need it. But the idea is, here we're testing a technology on the surface of Mars, and we're making sure that it works. Because if we send humans there in the future, that's going to be one of the things that they need. They're going to need oxygen to breathe.
So could you? There, I remember seeing some sci-fi movie, but they were able to successfully plant like moss on the surface of the planet. Are we?
Yeah.
Is that like a near possibility of sending something else up there and planting something
So
to
I'm not an
start eating up
expert.
that carbon?
I'm not an expert. You would need plants that are the Martian soil is suffused with a stuff called perchlorates, which is a poison to humans and to many other life forms. There are bacteria that can eat perchlorates. And so you might do something like seed the area with bacteria, or you might imagine genetically engineering a plant that can subsist on those perchlorates and maybe turn it into something that's friendlier to Earth. I don't know of any plants that can do that today, but like I said, this is far outside my area of expertise.
I didn't know Mars was poisonous.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I didn't either.
It's okay to swear on this, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fuck yeah.
Mars is a shithole. Mars is a terrible place. It's a like a long time ago it was a very different place than it is now, but these days it's a frozen, airless desert. If you had a vacation home there, you would never go. It's a miserable place. And it would take an enormous amount of work. I think it's worth doing, but it would take an enormous amount of work to turn it into something where humans could actually live. If you were trying to live on Mars today, you would have to, you'd have to just live in protected bubbles. Anytime you went outside, you'd have to wear a spacesuit. You think it's bad having to go outside and wear a mask. Just imagine having to put on a whole spacesuit before you go outside, and resources would be very limited. And we don't know how to do all the things that we would need to do, like extract oxygen, like extract water out of the soil. As I said, I think those things are worth doing, and I think that's a great future for humanity to kind of look at and build. But it's a long way away, and you shouldn't get the idea that Mars is a place that you could just go to now and kind of walk around and it would be fine. Like Mars, you would be pretty miserable being there today. Having said that, I would go in a heartbeat. Like if they had a rocket that was going to Mars tomorrow, I would be on it. I told Kim, my wife, I love you more than I love anything on this planet, but that's this planet. If there's a rocket going to Mars tomorrow, I'm on it. I got to go. And my reason for that probably sounds a little morbid, but it is. We're all going to die. I hate to say it. I'm not trying to say it to bring us down or anything, but that's why it's important to enjoy your life, right? Because eat, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow we may die, but we're all going to die. But we're not all going to get a chance to be the first person on Mars before we die. And so I would basically go just for the story.
I mean, but still, if you got there and died on Mars, you still get to be like, oh, Scott, that's the guy that died on Mars.
Right.
He's the first guy.
Okay. I'll take it, man. I'm all right with that.
I was really curious because I definitely remembered that your original answer to would you go to Mars was, oh, absolutely, no question about it.
Yeah.
Most definitely I would.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure if maybe that had changed over time. So
no,
delighted
I'd
to
be on the rocket tomorrow. And plus I have a couple of robot friends that I'd really like to visit.
Yes, you could bring Spirit back.
Come on, y'all.
Hey.
No. Spirit is home.
Depuis toujours.
You don't bring
Welcome.
Spirit. It's a mistake to bring Spirit back. What you do is you go there and build a city around her.
Oh, okay. All right.
Right? That's the best way to honor what she did for us.
Okay. I believe we have another song in the works.
Betty Lynn wants to know then whether you would consider the moon a better choice for a vacation home.
I don't know. The Chinese and the Russians are going to try to mine it, so it might.
Yeah,
I don't know about the neighborhood.
I'll give it this. It's closer, right? They're both pretty miserable. They're both pretty much inimical to human life. But I don't know. It would kind of depend, right? Do you want a vacation home that's just in the next town over? Or do you want a vacation home that's on another continent, farther away? Having said that, I would be happy to take both. I don't see why we have to choose.
Yeah. And going way back in the Twitch comments, there was a question about the atmospheric test that the new mission can do, whether there's anything about methane plumes on Mars. If they're abiotic, what do you think is causing them?
Yeah, so I don't, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not as familiar with Perseverance as I am with previous rovers. To the best of my knowledge, Perseverance doesn't have an atmospheric sampler. Curiosity does, and Curiosity has sampled methane on Mars, which may be what this commenter is thinking about. And it's really interesting. I would say there is no scientific consensus that it's a biological process. On Earth, we know that methane can be generated by biological processes and by non-biological processes. And the right thing to do in science is you've no doubt heard the phrase that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so if you're gonna say that, I have found this thing that's evidence of life, you have to do that by ruling out all the other possibilities and by making all the other possibilities even less likely than the possibility of life. And that work has not been done. That rover was not, the intent wasn't there, but it wasn't equipped to and wasn't meant to be equipped to be able to do that. Finding methane that persisted and it kind of came back in the way that it does was a big surprise. And there is not a settled scientific consensus about, at least not that I've seen. Maybe there has been, I haven't seen it, but last I saw, there was not a settled scientific consensus about why that's happening. But this goes back in the same category as the question about life, right? Is what's happening that this is caused by life? Well, that would be very exciting. But if what's happening here is like there's some kind of geological processes going on Mars that we had no idea about, maybe something going on beneath the surface that we had no idea about, that's exciting too.
So there's that. You're saying that there is an ongoing mission and investigation to figure out who dealt it on Mars. Yes.
I was not going to say that. I left it in your capable hands, and I'm glad you stepped up.
Don't worry.
Can always count on
connecting the dots. Thank you, folks. Welcome once again to the Gangstagrass live stream.
There is something that we do have to address, which is transmitting a song to Mars. And the fact that they transmitted us to Mars, which I still would like to believe that involved Perseverance whipping out like a bunch of speakers and just blasting the song on Mars.
Well, I hate to tell you that only one song has been sent to Mars, and that was not one of yours. So it's a poor choice, but I wasn't the one making the decision. It was a song by a different artist who shall remain nameless.
Thank you.
But your song, your Pi Day song, your awesome new Pi Day song, I should say, was chosen as the Rover Wake Up song for March 14th. So in that is one of the ways in which y'all are part of the mission.
Tell us about waking up the rover.
So it's an old tradition. So in human spaceflight, it's a tradition to play a song to wake up the astronauts. And that tradition was carried on for the rovers as well. So when it's morning in the rover time and we're uplinking the commands that we built the previous night, uplinking the commands to them to wake them up and have them start their day, we play a little song for them. And typically the songs are, the wake up songs are connected in some way to what's happening. So when Spirit and Opportunity went to Mars, they were tucked up inside this little shell. Tucked up inside their spacecraft, and when they came out, they had to actually stand up. And on the song, on the day that certainly on the day that Spirit stood up, I don't know what it was for Opportunity, but I believe it was the day that Spirit stood up. They played Bob Marley's "Get Up, Stand Up," right? So the songs are always connected to something like that. There was a day that we reformatted the Flash memory system, and the wake up song for that day was "Jumpin' Jack Flash."
All right.
And so for Pi Day, we could think of nothing more appropriate. They could think of nothing more appropriate than playing y'all's awesome new, until then unreleased Pi Day song.
So Bob Marley, Rolling Stones, Gangstagrass.
Basically,
I'm okay with
yes.
that. I'm good with that. I'm good with that company. Yeah, that's gonna be the livest trivia question ever.
I'm just imagining like a Martian, which we haven't seen them because they're hiding behind the rock, but a Martian, and they're just like, there's no music, there's no music, there's no music. Get up, stand up, there's no music, there's no music. Jumpin' Jack Flash, there's no music. Banjo Pi Day. So it's a very weird, that movie, that 2-hour, 4-hour movie, that's a weird, that's a Kubrick soundtrack there.
Didn't something happen at some point where Happy Birthday was sent, but the last note? Yeah. Tell us about that.
I was just going to mention that. Yeah, the Curiosity rover, the same instrument on the Curiosity rover, the SAM instrument or Sample Analysis of Mars instrument, that detected the methane. That instrument has these little piezos that, when correctly modulated, will make a sound. And they were able to come up with a way to modulate those to play Happy Birthday. And on its first anniversary on Mars, first Earth anniversary, not Mars anniversary, on Mars, the Curiosity rover played Happy Birthday to itself.
And
so that is the only time that music has ever been played on Mars, actually.
And what was the last note of that song?
Well, the last note of that song didn't actually happen because of a sequencing error. Happy birthday to...
Yeah. That cracked me up when I heard that. Just the idea that, like, Mars got the ultimate, like, musical practical joke. To what? To what? Finish the song.
And they're unresolved forever. And tell me about the wake up song is transmitted to the rover in some sort of format.
So the wake up song is just played for the ground team, for the human beings on Earth.
Mission
in a way to inspire them for the rover, and it's kind of a symbolic part of the mission. Yeah, but I'm sorry, it doesn't make it part of the uplink. We don't have much uplink. Like, there's limits on how much stuff we can send up to the rover for a day, and putting an MP3 in there is not usually part of the most critical stuff that we send up to the rovers. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we've been telling everybody.
We're going to keep doing that.
Yeah, you had to press that one.
Yep. You know what? Let's just wind this. You know what? You can edit this out in post. We won't even talk about
What did you just say?
We're not live.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we were talking about methane on Mars.
Right. The fact that Martians are invisible and they are farting.
We're editing that out too. I was curious about Mars time. So Scott, you've mentioned Mars time, and you've mentioned the JPL artist in residence, and yes, I am going to tie these together. And as I recall, there's parts of the mission where the folks on the mission, or some number of the folks on the mission, are actually working on Mars time. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what Mars time is, how that works in people's lives, and also if you could please tell us about the deer statues.
All right, right on. I will totally tell you about the deer statues. Maybe I'll do them in that order. So Mars time happens because the day length on Mars is not the same as the day length on Earth. The day length on Mars is pretty close to an Earth day, but not exactly the same as an Earth day. It's about 40 minutes longer. But the rover on Mars doesn't care about when the sun is up in the Earth sky. It cares about when the sun is up in the Martian sky. And so if you want to make the most efficient use of the rover, you have to work on the rover's schedule. And that means working on Mars time. So what it means from an Earth perspective is that your day is 40 minutes longer than the day of everybody else around you. And so if you come into work Monday at 8 a.m., then you come into work Tuesday at 8:40 a.m., and you come into work Wednesday at 9:20 a.m., and you come into work Thursday at 10 o'clock a.m., and so on. Your schedule kind of marches around the clock.
You get fired if you do that, right? That just seems like if you were to. I did that at a job, and it didn't work out.
Dude, the great thing about this is it would be a job where you have an excuse to do that, right? And it's the best thing in the world. Mars time is absolutely wonderful because it gets to the point where you're coming to work at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we did this for Spirit and Opportunity. And the great thing about this was
you're going to be going to work on Monday on Friday.
Yes, right. Yeah, that kind of thing. The great thing, Mars time was great for 3 reasons. One was that it emphasized the uniqueness and specialness of what we were doing. That we were the only people on this planet who were working on the schedule of another planet. I never got over feeling that was cool. The second reason it was cool was that you can get 40 more minutes of sleep every night. Or you can do what I did and work 40 minutes longer every day and still get 8 hours of sleep every day. But either way, it's glorious. But the third reason, and this is super petty, and I'm not defending it in any way at all, but I'm just being honest with you and laying it all out there. The third reason that Mars time was awesome was night people like me adapt really well to these kinds of changes in their schedule, as it turns out. But morning people really don't. And so all those jerks who had made me come to their stupid 7:30 a.m. meetings all through MER development, we're standing there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're standing there with their cups of coffee and all bleary-eyed, and they're like, I don't even know what day it is. And I'm like, hey, everybody, we're driving a Mars rover. Isn't this great? But it turns out that's a really unfriendly schedule to live on if you want to connect with other people on Earth, because your schedule doesn't always allow you to be awake at the same times that they are. So as we get better at operating the rover and we shrink the planning day down so that we don't need the entire Martian night to figure out what the rover's next day is going to be, the goal is to get it down to the point where you're operating the rover within 8 to 10 hours. And then when your 8 to 10 hours fits entirely within the Martian night, then you plan tonight for the rover's next day. You just aren't using all the time that's available to you. But when, as seen from the perspective of Earth, the start time for your day crawls kind of later and later and later. The time when you get the data back from your rover so that you can plan the next day for the rover gets later and later and later, and you no longer have time in a regular Earth day to plan the next day anymore. Then you switch to a mode that we call restricted sols, where you are planning 2 days for the rover every other day. And we call them restricted sols because there's restrictions on what you can do. You can't plan 2 back-to-back drives because not having seen the result of the first one, you can't plan the second one. So you're not making optimal use of the rover, but it's a kind of a balance where it doesn't burn people out and people will stay on the mission because it's more sustainable for humans who want to live on Earth time schedules. But you're still making good use of the rover. But because of all this, because the rovers, wherever they land on Mars, there's so few of them that each one of them gets its own time zone. And in its time zone, noon is overhead, is when the sun is overhead directly where that rover is. And so all the rovers have their own time zones, and they all have different ones. And some of us have watches. Oh, you can't really quite see it. But some of us have watches that are set to that's Perseverance time, and I can set my watch to that's Spirit time and Opportunity and whatever. You can just kind of barely see this. There's Curiosity, there's Insight, Lander, and back to Perseverance. So you can keep on your wrist what time it is for the rover. That kind of thing.
So do you make your whole
Sorry.
Ooh, go ahead.
Did you program that yourself?
I did actually. Yeah, I wrote an app for my phone that does that, and it connects to my watch and does this. And this is the reason. Back in the days of Mur, when Mur landed, smartphones weren't a thing yet because it was 2004 and they didn't come out for a few years. And so they actually went to this jeweler and he just fiddled with the mechanism just a little bit to slow him down just a little bit, so you could be wearing a Mars time wristwatch. And these days, anybody can have one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I haven't said that enough on this stream, but that was my threshold right there. I know we've talked about Mars and Rover and music and blah blah blah. That's cool.
I'm glad. I know it took a while to impress you. It took over an hour to impress you, but I'm glad we got there. Okay.
Absolutely.
And we haven't even gotten to the deer statues yet.
Oh, right, the deer statue.
So deer statues on Mars.
Yeah.
By the way, after we finish this, oh crap! I was so ready to make my conspiracy theory videos for YouTube, but go ahead, continue.
The deer statues. So the deer statues this is when I was a freshly minted JPL, or I was just working at JPL, and I got really super interested in the first thing that I was doing, and I was putting in really long hours, and so I was coming in early in the morning, and I would work on it all day, and I would leave at night. And my head was still filled, even when I left at night, my head was still filled with the software I was writing. When I would come in the next day, it was filled with all these ideas about things I wanted to do. And I started noticing this weird phenomenon, which is when I would leave at night, the JPL guards, for some reason, and I didn't know why they were doing this, the JPL guards would come around and put these deer statues on the lawn. And I'm like, that's a really funny thing. I don't know why they do that. But I was not really paying attention. It was just sort of there, and I was kind of noticing it was off to the side, but my head is filled with the software. And so I'd come back in the morning and they had taken away the deer statues. And then I would leave that night and the deer statues were back. And I would come in the next day and the deer statues weren't there. And I would leave at night and the deer statues were there. And I'd come back the next morning and the deer statues weren't there. And this went on for a couple of weeks. That's how long it took me to realize that those weren't deer statues, those were deer.
Oh.
What
was the thing you just got? You were just saying extraordinary results require extraordinary proof.
Extraordinary evidence. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like you said that earlier tonight.
Yeah. Well, see, we can all make mistakes. We can all run afoul of that. But yeah. That was pretty embarrassing. And it's good to have stories like that to tell about yourself, to keep yourself humble. You're okay, yeah, I'm an idiot.
I'm just glad you didn't try to touch one.
Wow. Yeah, I don't like to think about that. I probably would have figured it out sooner. Put it that way.
These statues are alive.
Yeah, that's amazing. They've really made real progress in animatronics. JPL is so good at robotics.
JPL is like a wildlife preserve because you know, it's this sort of isolated place. Would you talk a little bit about how JPL came to be where it was?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, and you're right about it being a wildlife preserve. By the way, the guards actually do feed the raccoons. I would go out, I would leave at night sometimes if it'd be late enough that the raccoons would be out. The guards would be like feeding them because it's up there in the hills, and yeah, the wildlife kind of comes down and does its thing. They've even had alerts about mountain lions around the lab. That happens once in a while. They come down, they're hungry, and that's, you know, it's where the deer are. What are you going to do? So anyway, but JPL got to be where it is because a long time ago, back in the 1920s and 30s, people were still trying to figure out rockets. They didn't really know how rockets worked. And there was this, the Americans who were working on rockets had congregated at Caltech, California, and would go out to this kind of remote area in the Arroyo Seco and like fire off rockets and like see how they worked and like try to make them go. They ended up building JPL at the location where those folks went to like fire off their rockets, because it was, you know, that was where they were doing their experiments with rocket propulsion. It was natural to start putting buildings there and start building up these facilities and making JPL. And so JPL is that way to this day. And to this day, they are still cleaning up no kidding, they are still cleaning up the poisoned soil that was left behind from all the rocket fuel back in the 1920s and 30s when they were doing these experiments. Yeah. Incidentally, I'll just put in a quick plug. If you're interested in the history of spaceflight before NASA back in these days, she doesn't really talk about this too much, but my friend Amy Shearer Title wrote a terrific book called Breaking the Chains of Gravity that has a lot about she really mostly goes through the German rocket program, but how that kind of like came and dovetailed with the Americans program and turned into NASA. It's fascinating stuff.
So basically Caltech was like, we don't want you blowing up our stuff.
Yeah, right. For reals. And in fact, that happened. One of the stories in Amy's book about the German rocket program is about the German scientists like sending up a rocket. The rocket comes down a little early, still has a lot of fuel in it, and it sets fire to a police building across the street from where they're doing this. So yeah, that stuff would happen. I mean, they didn't know. They were trying to figure it all out and like how rockets even worked and like what are these things and how do you make them go. And
is there any information out there of the Wright brothers, like after they were cool with the airplane, like how about rockets next?
I don't know if the Wright brothers really got into the rockets. There were plenty of other people. Goddard in this country was interested in rockets, and von Braun and a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of Germans and other people in other countries were all kind of getting the ideas at the same time. I don't know of any connection between the Wright brothers and rockets, but I'd be happy to be proved wrong about that.
It is an
interestingly, by the way. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yes.
I was just gonna say it's an interesting question because you look at like, this is a weird tangent, but if anybody ever plays like the Civilization games where, you know, you're sort of advancing different technologies in various orders, and a lot of them depend on each other, but some of them don't. And, you know, you can develop a civilization where you end up developing rocketry independent of and even before developing, you know, powered fixed wing flight.
Whoa.
They're not
That's
really...
funny. I guess there's no reason in principle you couldn't do that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, just the trees are developed in that way where it's like, no, we figured out how to make them go straight up, and we didn't really need to do the horizontal thing. So never mind that.
That's cool. Brian, your mention of the Wright brothers reminds me, it's a really cool thing when you see the first powered flight on Mars in the coming days when that happens.
Which I have questions about, by the way.
Okay, right on. I will do my best to answer them. But that helicopter, the Ingenuity helicopter, has on board it a tiny little scrap of fabric from the wing of the Wright Flyer, the first aircraft. It was, excuse me, the Wright brothers flew. After they flew that aircraft, in order to, as I understand the story, in order to raise funds, they cut the spacecraft, the fabric wings, they cut them up into little pieces and they sold them as a fundraising endeavor. And somebody got a hold of one of those little scraps of fabric and put it on the Ingenuity helicopter.
That's so cool.
Wow.
Yeah. Another connection we have between the Rovers and the Wright brothers, by the way, in addition to the obvious ones, back in the day, I suppose you know that they named the Rovers with naming contests. So they have a naming contest for school children to say what you think the Rovers should be named. And when they were naming the rovers that became Spirit and Opportunity, the Mars exploration rovers, one of the top candidates, one of the finalists, was Wilbur and Orville. And that was actually going to be my choice. Like, that was my favorite, because I was like, the things have built-in personality, and we launched them excuse me, on the 100-year anniversary of the Wright brothers' flight. They were in 1903, and we launched the Rovers in 2003. And so at the time, I thought those were really good names. Sophie Collis won me over to the name Spirit and Opportunity. Her essay about those names, I read it after I had made this decision. I read about Wilbur and Orville. I read her essay, and she talked about she was a Russian orphan. And had been adopted by an American family, and talked about that Spirit and Opportunity represented for her the spirit of the spirit of America, and the opportunity that she found by coming here. And I have to say, after I read that essay, I was a big fan of those names.
That gave me chills. That's,
right?
Yeah. Right. That's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. But you had questions, Brian. What can I answer for you?
Yeah. First of all, if there's that much. I'll try to ask these really quick. If there's that much delay between commands, how is this helicopter going to be operating? How fast is it moving? What sort of copter does it have? Is it seeing, does it see everything around it? Does it provide a 3D map, or is it more of just a picture that you're getting? And also, is there any sort of forward-thinking technology to beat this time delay, this communication delay that you're having with Mars?
And is it a quadcopter? And does it have collective pitch or fixed pitch? All right.
Well, so I'm not that well educated about the helicopter, but I'll tell you what I know. The flights are all pre-planned, pre-scripted. So you say, we're going to fly up for 3 meters, then we're going to fly over there for 10 meters, and then we're going to come back to where we started, like that kind of thing. Just like the rover's own driving, the helicopter's flying is all pre-scripted. It's all pre-planned. And you just have primitives that tell you what you want the helicopter to do. Maybe I don't know about the camera system. I shouldn't talk about the camera system because I don't know. It has one, but I don't know the details of the camera system. But that's part of what they want, what they're thinking about possibly doing with future exploration is you would send the rover up, sort of buzz away from the rover and kind of image the area there before flying back. Like rovers might take little companion drones that would do this kind of scouting for them. And so it does have a camera system to kind of prove out that's part of the proof of concept of what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, you were asking, is it a quadcopter? It's this very interesting design. So I have for real flown a helicopter, and it's terrifying but awesome. So I learned when I was flying a helicopter, one of the things I learned about it, and y'all might already know this, but it was news to me at the time. So most Earth helicopters, they have the big spinny propeller on top, right? That kind of spins around, and that propeller, as it's spinning around, imparts a torque to the body of the helicopter. It wants to kind of follow the propeller around. And so that tail rotor is there pushing in the other direction to make the helicopter stay stable. And by pushing harder or not as hard, you can control the yaw of the helicopter, right? Mm-hmm. And on Ingenuity, the Martian helicopter, they didn't want that design. Instead, what they did was they put 2 big propellers on top, and they spin them in opposite directions. And that way the torque from one cancels out the torque from the other. And so that's how they keep it stable. They don't have a tail rotor. They have the two very large blades. There's a meter long on top of the thing, spinning in opposite directions at the same time, and very, very fast, because you have to spin very, very fast to give you any kind of lift in that atmosphere.
Is that the same sort of design as medical helicopters?
The medical helicopters I have seen use the traditional design, the big spinny blade on top and the smaller blade out the back. I'm not an expert on helicopters, and so I can't say whether there are other helicopters that would be designed that way, but I haven't seen any that look like that, at least.
Honestly, the most coaxial helicopters I've seen are actually since it's a simple enough design, at least the Earth ones, is those are sort of the cheapest entry-level helicopters that you can get, because it's just the two rotors and you don't have to worry about a tail rotor. And the way that it turns is it'll slow down one of the rotors and then let the torque from the other one
that makes
harder.
sense.
And maybe, I don't know if that's how this one does it. It's a pretty simple principle. But yeah, you see them flying around like shopping malls and stuff, typically.
Yeah, right on. I didn't know we had a helicopter expert here. This is awesome.
Oh, we have a helicopter?
Yeah.
Cool. Is it you or is it not?
Yeah.
I haven't flown an actual. Were you inside the helicopter that you flew?
Yeah. Like I was inside it controlling it, and I learned all about it. And I can tell you how helicopters work. I can't take one off or land one, but I can fly one.
Man.
Yeah, for real. That was a fascinating experience. That was so cool.
You don't need to take off or land. All you need is to know how to drive a lot of right?
Look, as long as I can get close enough to the surface that it doesn't kill me when it drops the rest of the way, I'm okay. But flying helicopters is a really interesting experience, in part because there's, it's not like a rover time lag, but there's just a couple seconds time lag between when you do something with the joystick and when the helicopter responds to it. And so for big gross control, like I was doing, flying, kind of along the 10 freeway kind of thing, it doesn't really matter. That delay doesn't really matter. But for fine operations, like where you're trying to take off and land, where you really want to control the helicopter really well, you get in this feedback loop where you push forward, it hasn't done anything, you push forward a little more, and then it responds to the first part you push forward, and it goes too far, and you pull back, and you kind of oscillate this way, where you're kind of always behind it. And you learn to overcome that, but I didn't fly one for long enough to learn to overcome that. So I never figured that part out.
And that's happening when you fly one in real time you're talking about. So if you were to try to actually fly a 7-minute delayed radio control helicopter, way worse, right? So you mentioned before that it's you're not flying by wire, you're transmitting, I guess, a course, a set of general directions, and then I think it essentially flies itself, you said?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. So you tell it, I want to go up 5 meters and then this way 10 meters, and then I want to come back and, kind of come back the same path so I land where I started, that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. But that's what we do with the Rovers too. We tell the Rovers, we want you to go forward 5 meters, turn 45 degrees to the left, go forward another 10 meters, turn 12 degrees to the right, and then after that, we want you to go to this spot and find your own way there. That kind of thing. We pre-script all of that stuff for the Rovers too. So pre-scripting all that stuff for the helicopters is not tremendously different in concept. It's different in execution, but not tremendously different in concept.
Are you sure to say Simon Says after each command?
Oh no! I better contact them right away. What if they didn't think of that?
Is there a code version of that?
And before you fly, you have to say "Mother, may I?" That's little known fact about Rover driving.
Would make sense.
I forgot part of my question earlier is there any other technology on the horizon for faster communication between Earth and Mars?
If only. The problem we have right now is that we are the fundamental limit is the speed of light. The speed of light is too slow for us. I was talking about scientific, questions that would be really fascinating if they got resolved, and getting something faster than the speed of light would be one of those fascinating questions. If we could get faster than light communication or faster than light travel, it would have enormous consequences well beyond the ability to control your rovers better. That would be fascinating and have all kinds of payoffs and benefits and wonderful things, including completely breaking our understanding of how the universe works, which would be very exciting in its own way. But as far as we know, as far as we are able to tell right now, the speed of light is like a fundamental property of the universe. We don't know why it's like that, but it's like that, where, as soon as something happens, it's sort of like a signal coming out from that will radiate away, nothing faster than the speed of light. And there's just nothing in the universe that works any faster than that. And, it would be lovely to have a really full understanding of why, and maybe a really full understanding of why would give us some kind of ideas about, things we could do to sneak around the rules as we seem to see them. But as far as we can tell today, we're stuck with it. That speed limit is there.
So when you're
go ahead.
When you're sending out messages and instructions, they're going at the speed of light.
That's right. They can't go any faster to Mars than the speed of light. So we're just stuck with the speed of light. Anything that's a significant light time delay away is beyond your ability to interactively control.
For now.
The speed of light, because they're being sent via electromagnetic waves.
Yeah, exactly. That's it exactly. We're sending radio waves, and the radio signals are light, and they travel at the speed of light.
Dope.
Gotcha.
So quick shout out to Cindy in the chat, Mom Incarnate. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday!
This is our birthday present to you.
We'll get Curiosity to sing happy birthday to you sometime very soon.
There you go, except without the last note. No last note. So how many times, Scott, you were talking about, those kind of, oh no moments. And I'm curious, how many times do you like wake up in the middle of the night when you're a Mars rover driver thinking, oh God, are we going to run into a rock? Or did I forget to send such and such a command? Tell us about that.
All the time, especially at first. And the really, like what would normally happen is you wake up in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, cold sweat. Oh my God, I forgot to send the so-and-so command. Scramble to your computer, frantically log in remotely, and discover that, oh no, you did actually remember to send that command. It's totally fine, everything's okay. That's what would normally happen. And I didn't like this very much. So what I did was I started writing another piece of software that would basically check our command sequences. So all the rules that we had about what we are supposed to do to send to the rover, this software knew about it and would check over the command sequence and make sure that you had done that thing. And as we discovered new categories of mistakes that we could make, I would build them into the software so that it had a new thing to check. And so then when I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat, oh my God, I forgot to do the thing. What I could do instead is I could say to myself, oh, no. FRCheck knows about that. It already checked that. It's fine. And I could go back to sleep much sooner. But, you're in a position where you are in control of a priceless space asset on the surface of another planet. If you break it, it's dead. And you are like the only person you are the person ultimately responsible for taking care of this precious resource that you love and keeping it safe and taking care of it. And it's natural to have some anxiety about that. And I certainly did.
Yeah.
I'd be lying if I said otherwise.
Is there a you break it, you buy it rule?
Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing there wasn't, because when we landed the rovers, we figured that every sol on Mars cost $4 million. Every Martian day cost $4 million. We got this because the overall cost of the mission was $800 million, and we expected about 200 Martian days of combined operations between the two rovers. And so roughly $800 million for the total cost for the mission, $200 million on the surface. In some sense, you're costing $4 million of salt. So then we thought, well, what that means is, let's say that you are an engineer who makes an average of, you're a good, highly paid, you've got a great job, you're a highly paid engineer, and you make an average of $100,000 a year over your career, and you work for 40 years. 40 years times $100,000 is $4 million. So that would mean that if you made a mistake that screwed up one Martian day of operations on the rover, then in some legitimate sense, you were wiping out all the value that you were going to generate over your working lifetime, right? So that's enough to make a person nervous. Yeah, that's kind of terrifying. And so that's not the primary reason, but it's another reason why we were so very careful to check everything, because you don't want to be the person who screws up a sol and effectively wipes out all the value you're going to generate over your entire working lifetime on Earth.
I
feel that.
Like that.
I feel like
I see why you wake up that way.
Right.
Cold sweat sometimes.
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm playing banjo and I go for a note, but it's not quite the right note that I was trying to play, and I feel you is what I'm saying. It's
basically the same thing, Dan.
Yeah,
it's basically the same thing.
I know what that's like.
But honestly, the money is one thing, and the money is kind of an easy to quantify way to talk about it, and something that everybody kind of understands. But honestly, the much more important part of that for me was the emotional connection to my girls, right? My twin girls on Mars. You feel love for them, and you care for them, and you want to protect them, and you get a sense when you're working on these missions that the rover is this robot body that you have that's on another planet, but you aren't the only one who inhabits it. You inhabit it along with the rest of your team. It's all something that we all do together. And the most common pronoun that we use when we talk about the Rovers is we. We're going to drive over that hill today. We're going to take a picture of so and so and so on. And like you have this mindset of like, this is us. This is, this robot that I care about, and it's all these people that I care about. It's all kind of embodied in this spacecraft on another planet. And that's the thing that you don't want to hurt, right? That's the thing that you want to take care of, and that is really precious to you and close to your heart, and that you want to take care of.
Amen.
Can you tell us about how Mickey Mouse ended up on Mars and any other fun stories like that?
Yeah. So this happened. Let's see, where to start the story. On the Rovers, we had this instrument called the rat. And the rat was a drill. So you could drill just a little bit below the surface of a rock and see just kind of what was underneath, just a few millimeters underneath the surface of the rock. And the rat also had a capability of brushing off the surface of a rock. So you could just brush off this, instead of grinding all the way down to the rock, which was a very time-intensive operation, and it would only happen. So you had a limited lifetime because the drill bits would wear down over time. So instead of that, you could just kind of like brush off the surface of a rock and get a view of the rock, so that when you took pictures of it, or you image it with your spectrometer, you were seeing the surface of the rock and not seeing the dust that was on top of the rock, right? So it was being an unobscured kind of view. So at one point in the mission, we wanted to do something we had never done before. They wanted to take a bigger brush off, kind of a bigger surface on the rock, and it would make these kind of circular spots that were maybe the size of a $50. Okay, so it got to get a circular spot on Mars, and the spots that it would brush off, because the dust on Mars is lighter color than most of the other things on Mars. The spots would be the kind of these dark circles that you would make on Mars. So you would like do a rat brush, you would get this kind of dark circle, you would hit it with a spectrometer, and you would know what that area of the rock was made of. So at one point, they wanted to hit it with a different instrument that needed a bigger footprint, and so they needed to brush off a surface that was bigger than what one rat hole could do, one rat brush surface could do. And the scientists who wanted this done were kind of explaining it to me, and they were telling me, we want to like, get these 3 circles. We just got to have 3 circles together. It doesn't really matter what orientation they're in. And I'm like, would it be okay if it looked like this? And they're like, yes. And so I did 3 rat brushes in, let's see if I can get Zoom to cooperate with me, in kind of this configuration. So 1 circle here, 1 circle here, 1 circle here, and made a Mickey Mouse head on Mars. And when Disney came and interviewed me about that a year or 2 later, they were very, very happy and very excited about that story. So I'm a kind of an interplanetary like vandal, right? An interplanetary graffiti artist making Mickey Mouse heads on Mars.
Is there any way that you could do that with triangles and make the Triforce out there?
So this is a great idea, and I love doing this. Unfortunately, the rat brush would only make circles for us. But I'm all in favor, Brian, of doing a follow-up mission that has other capabilities, and ideally one that has spray can, so that we can actually do proper art on Mars. And things like that.
But Brian, if we put a triangle on Mars and it was the all-seeing eye, you know how many heads would explode with Illuminati confirmed with the all-seeing eye on Mars? Come on, man, we can't do that. We can't do that.
I think that is the reason to do it. It'll get everybody really interested in Mars.
No.
Everybody's want to go up there.
Such a flamethrower. Any other stories like that? Like, tell us about home plate or anything like that.
I have so many. If you've got time, the story I would love to tell you, this is one of my favorite stories from the mission. The story I would love to tell you is about the Tuskegee Airmen. So I'm sure all of you know who the Tuskegee Airmen are, but for any of your listeners who might not know, these were the first African-American combat pilots in the United States, what was then the United States Army. The Air Force hadn't been invented yet because it was World War II. So back in the day, there were forces that wanted to integrate the armed services and that believed that African-American pilots would be capable of doing this. And there were those who did not, and they were kind of having this internal struggle. And they set up a training base for them in Tuskegee, Alabama. So the kind of like racist white forces won to that extent that they were going to like have this training happen in like the most racist part of the deep South that they could possibly find an air base in. And they sent the pilots there with the idea that they were going to fail. Instead, they succeeded spectacularly. They got to the point where they were so good at their jobs that the white bomber pilots would request them as escorts because they felt safer with the Tuskegee Airmen flying alongside them than with any other pilots flying alongside them, right? They were absolutely tremendous. And of course, they're doing all of this at a time when racism in America was even worse than it is now, and it was an even more horrible environment. And they knew that when they came home, they weren't going to be the ones who got the ticker tape parades going down, the streets of New York. They were going to be welcomed back into their communities, but they weren't really going to be kind of welcomed back into broader white society, the way that the white, soldiers fighting along them would be, soldiers and pilots and whatever fighting along them would be. So I grew up hearing stories about the Tuskegee Airmen, and these guys were like my heroes, right? This is an amazing story to me, and it's an amazing story to me to like fight and struggle and overcome that. And also to do it knowing that you're not going to get the benefits out of that the person beside you who is also working hard and fighting and struggling and endangering himself and so on is going to do that, right? Like that's just it's so meaningful to me. So what a great story to me. So we're a couple of years into the mission, and there's this woman who works on the mission, Brenda Franklin, and Brenda is like, every time I would talk to Brenda, I would hear a different story about her, a different story about her life. So she was like, she co-founded the first independent television station in Texas. And she was like, for a time, a world record holding hot air balloonist. And like, she was Bette Midler's personal assistant. And like, there's all these things that are like, there's no, and now she's working on Mars Rovers, right? There's no way all these things are true of one person. But as far as I could tell, that like all the stories would all check out. Like all these things were true about her. This is so fucking weird. And she's this like Texas grandma. She's like 60 years old and like, has this huge, this great Southern drawl, whatever. So anyway, one day, Brenda, who was Bette Midler's personal assistant and world record holding hot air balloonist and everything, casually drops into the conversation that one of her neighbors was a Tuskegee Airman. And I'm like, what the, you've got to be kidding. You've got to bring him in I've got to meet this person. And, great thing about being a Mars Rover driver is you can kind of meet anybody you want to meet. And I'm like, we got to bring this person on lab, and we got to have him come in and, they'll understand a lot of what we're doing. And this will be a great thing. And she's like, nah, don't worry about it. And this goes back and forth for I'm not kidding, a year. I would see her and I would be like, Brenda, when are you bringing your neighbor on lab? And she's like, nah, don't worry about it. And eventually she's like, well, he's in a wheelchair. It would be tough for him to get around. And I'm like, Brenda, you don't understand. I will like get down on my knees and slide underneath his wheelchair and pick him up and carry him around on my back. If that's what it takes to get a Tuskegee Airman in here. This is so fucking cool. We got to do this. So eventually, after like cajoling her, the blessed day comes, and the Tuskegee Airmen come and visit us at JPL. And it's like, great. And it's not just Leroy Chris, who was her neighbor, but another one, Oliver Goodall, who also came along with them. So it's 2 Tuskegee Airmen and a few members of their family and so on. And we like bring them into the planning room and we're talking with them, and they're like getting everything we're talking about, because we talk about the Rovers, yaw, pitch and roll, which is stuff they would know as pilots, like all the stuff that they would get. And they're just kind of hanging out with us. And at one point, my God, I ate lunch with them. And I'm sitting next to them and I'm eating a sandwich. And like, all I can think about is like, these gods are next to me eating their sandwich. This is so fucking weird. So we bring them into the sequencing room with us to like observe kind of what we're doing for a little while. And Steve Squires, who's the top science guy in the mission, had this characteristically genius idea. So Spirit was going along across the top of this geological feature called home plate. And we were trying to race to a position where we would get her into a safe spot so she could be parked for the winter, with the sun lower in the horizon. She wouldn't get as much solar power, and we needed her kind of safely parked. But we were in a new place, and whenever we go to a new place with the Rovers, we kind of name things. We give things these informal nicknames in a different way. And so like we would give them nicknames of like players in the women's leagues, women's baseball leagues, or things you find in bowls, or like just whatever the person who's in charge that day feels like naming them. And Squires has the idea that like, hey, we should name the rocks in this area, and this kind of whole broader area, we should name them after the Tuskegee Airmen, who were important to you, people like pilots that you fought alongside of and so on. So we had this one rock that I talked to them about. I'm like, this one rock that's kind of like been our guide star as we're kind of going across the top of home plate. When we come in and we look at the pictures, we look at that rock, and like that's the rock that tells us like the direction that we're going in. What should we name that rock? And they're like, oh, we should name that rock General B.O. Davis. He was like their commanding officer, and he was the first African American general in the what became the Air Force. And we should name that after him. The rock that's your guide star should be named after General B.O. Davis. So we named that rock after General B.O. Davis, and we named some of the other rocks after other comrades of theirs, mostly departed comrades of theirs. And then I get this idea. So before I tell you this, it's important that you understand about me that I know intellectually, that the right order is to think first and then speak, right? That's always the right order to do things in. That's what you should always do. You should think and then you should speak.
This sounds like I don't always. Story. All right.
But I don't always do it, right? Sometimes I don't. And this was one of those moments. So before I could stop myself, I have this idea. I'm like, there's this other rock that like everything is kind of going along. It's flat terrain. It's pretty smooth sailing between us and where we're trying to go. But there's this one rock that's like right in the way and is going to be kind of a thorn in our sides. Like getting around this rock and getting it to just the spot that we want to be, this rock is going to be kind of a pain in the butt. And we needed a name for this rock. And so I say, hey guys, I've got this great idea. Why don't we name this rock that's in our way after the racist white training officers that you experienced in Tuskegee, Alabama? And there's this dead silence, nothing. And it went on for, I think, about a week. And it's enough time that in my brain, I'm like, oh, you idiot. Why do you do things like this? You know that you should think first and then you should speak. These guys are like your heroes and you've offended them. And this is terrible. You've ruined everything. Why do you like? And then they burst out laughing. And everybody burst out laughing. And I'm like, oh, thank God. And so Oliver Goodall says, we should name that rock after Colonel Selway. He was the most obstreperous man I ever met. And we named that rock Colonel Selway, and then we drove over it 3 times.
I wanted to just tack on to that an interesting note on the Tuskegee Airmen, not one of the men that you mentioned, but Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ashby. Brian Farrow, the fiddle player in this group, used to be playing until recently with Dom Flemons. And Dom Flemons, is a terrific, the American songster. He's a wonderful musician. And Dom's great uncle Bob, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ashby, who just passed away
Rest in peace.
Last month, was one of the last 3 remaining Tuskegee Airmen.
Oh, man.
I was really hoping that it was going to be Robert Ashby that
Did you ever meet him, or?
I never met Robert Ashby. I've met some of the other Tuskegee Airmen. I was connected to this place called Tomorrow's Aeronautical Museum here in Los Angeles that trains it's in the Compton area. It trains African-American kids to be pilots and airline mechanics and things like that. And so I've gone and given a couple talks there and helped with fundraisers of theirs and stuff like that. And they have they were inspired by the Tuskegee Airmen. And so I met a few of them through them, and they have they named the aircraft after them. They, stenciled their names on them and things like that. So I've met a few there, but not Robert Ashby to the best of my recollection.
Yeah.
I'm glad that between us, we've got it covered.
Yeah, right.
That's leading me back to a comment and a question I had earlier. Because Robert Ashby related to Dom did Black Cowboys. The Mars is really dusty and Western-like. Can we get space cowboys? How are we going to be designing our space suits to look like cowboy costumes? You call them cowboys on Mars. How do we get cows on Mars?
Keep going.
And then it comes back to this other question I had, which was, what do you want to see on the next rover? I know one just got up there, but technology just marches ahead so fast. What do you want to see out there next, other than space cowboys?
I'll give a couple of answers to that. My flippant answer would be, what do I want to see on the next Mars rover? Me. That's my joking answer to that question. My serious answer to that question would have been a ramen spectrometer, but they sent one on Perseverance, so they've already kind of knocked that item off my
Sorry,
wish
did
list.
you say ramen, like the noodles?
Yeah.
It sounds like the noodle. It's spelled differently. RAMAN, ramen spectrometer. Let's see. What would I like to see on the next rover? I think what I would really like to see on the next rover, and I'm a person who always wants this, but what I want to see on the next rover is better optics, sending us back better pictures from the surface. It would probably be near and dear to your hearts that this rover is sending back sound for the first time from the surface of Mars. And so those are samples that you've got to include in the many songs that we've talked about writing tonight, I would hope. But what I would find when we were driving rovers was the limit to how far we could drive was always how well we could see. And so if you can't see beyond a certain distance, you've got to turn over control to the rover, which has a very slow CPU and can't think very fast and can't drive very fast. And even though they've mitigated some of that on this rover, it's still going to be the case that like the farther out you can see well, the better and the farther you can drive. And just myself, kind of selfishly from my background as a rover driver, that's what I'm always going to want. So I'm always going to want better and better and better vision looking forward. Of course, we can put that better vision on a helicopter and make the helicopter like fly out and do stuff as well.
I'm sorry, Scott, but the comments in Twitch have spoken, and it's going to be speakers.
It's going to be speakers.
That would be good. So if that rover were booming along, if we made it a low rider and it was booming along like blasting out the Gangstagrass songs.
Another thing.
That's the plan.
Now we got something.
Who do you want to go first, Dan or me? Take a pick.
You. I don't know.
Hydraulics. That's what
hydraulics.
I would say.
Yeah, nice. Right.
Rover hydraulics.
Good. So hydraulics, I think, would be helpful, right? Because that would actually help you like traverse terrain a little bit better. But what I was going to say was, that brings me to the question. I've actually been doing some basic calculations over here, trying to think, because it had come up that Ingenuity, because of the lower atmosphere, the rotors have to spin faster. Yes. Now, we mentioned putting dope speakers into the rover. I don't think that speakers would necessarily impede the progress of the rover, but there is a way in which sound can be a major impediment to aircraft. And it actually, we've been talking about like the upper speed limits of things. And the upper speed limit of a helicopter is a really interesting one. And I don't know how this specifically would affect the coaxial rotor design, but the upper limit of a helicopter is the point at which the advancing rotor, whichever one that, and with the coaxial, it's sort of both of them at the same time, but the advancing rotor plus the speed of the aircraft moving forward itself, where the advancing rotor breaks the speed of sound.
Right.
That's the and then so that sent me on a little rabbit hole. So it's a 1.2 meter diameter rotor that's spinning at 2,400 revolutions per minute. That all comes out to a tip speed of about 150 meters per second. Okay. Now, the speed of sound is different on Mars. Yeah. Right? So then my question is like, I mean, I don't imagine the thing is going, but if the speed of sound is like 240 meters per second, and the speed of the rotor is 150 meters per second, and then I'm even wondering like I don't know if this is an issue normally with coaxial rotors, but we've never had a coaxial rotor helicopter going this fast, but 2,400 RPMs, as they're passing each other, I'm kind of wondering if they're going to start to generate little Martian sonic booms even standing still. Has anybody, I mean, is that a legitimate thing?
I know a lot more about rovers than I know about helicopters, so I couldn't tell you. But Dan, I love this idea, and a good friend of mine is on the helicopter operations. So I'll have to ask her about like whether it can make little sonic booms, and I'll have to get back to you. I can't give an answer in real time, I'm afraid.
I feel like if you say Martian sonic boom, she'd either be like, yes, oh my God, or no, I don't know.
On Mars, because the atmosphere is so thin, it transmits low frequency sounds better than high frequency sounds. So you would probably hear that as like a really sick beat.
Yes.
Yeah. If you heard the sonic booms, if it was generating them. Oh my God. Yeah.
Another question, what does a sonic boom generate? How much energy does a sonic boom generate? I mean, I guess that's a bunch of other factors, but if it's easy to get sonic booms out of the rotors on Mars, can you turn that into energy?
Well, you would never, physics being a harsh mistress, you would never be able to recapture as much energy as it took you to create it in the first place, right?
Of course.
Badly.
And they have tested this thing, as you said, in a simulated Martian atmosphere with simulated Martian gravity. So the theoretical. I mean, this is all still not. I don't want to say theoretical. What's the word? It's unproven, right? We haven't actually flown it on Mars.
That's right. And we are now in the state with helicopters on Mars that we were with rovers on Mars when Sojourner landed in 1997, right? It was just like this, Sojourner wasn't a very impressive rover, certainly by today's standards. It just had one science instrument and one like really super low resolution black and white camera. But the point of it was to prove that we are able to actually do this, that we can actually drive a rover on Mars that's like untethered. It can go away from its rover. It was sort of logically tethered because the rover was its only communication link, but it was physically untethered. And so this was like our little proof of concept. And Ingenuity is the same kind of thing, just with helicopters on Mars. So who knows what the next, Martian helicopter is going to bring and how much bigger and badder it's going to be. And, maybe we'll start, just as with Mars Pathfinder, we landed a lander and this little rover kind of crawled away from it. And the next time we went back to Mars, we basically scaled up the whole rover and scaled up the whole lander and put it on top of the rover, right? And now with we're not even sending a lander anymore, we're just sending a rover. And maybe now we're sending a rover that will drop a helicopter, and next time we won't even bother, we'll just send a helicopter.
Oh, and it will have giant speakers. Yes, this is great.
Right. Especially the giant speakers.
Especially.
Man, the Calvin Harris shows on Mars must be ridiculous because it goes with a lot of bass. Calvin Harris, techno punk, techno music, deep house.
I get you. Yeah, he'd probably love it. Although I'm not sure how much of it he can hear anymore, but.
So next time we have you on, we're definitely going to talk about sound traveling on Mars. And I also hope that we'll get to talk to Kim a little bit. Scott is married to an incredibly impressive engineer working on the Mars rovers and the various projects.
She's the science operations team chief for Perseverance. And she's taking care of the boy so that I can talk to you today.
We'll trade
but next time we'll swap. And, you'll have Kim in here, and I'll take care of the boy.
Yes, that's perfect. So I have one final question for you, but before I ask it, does anybody else have anything else that they wanted to ask Scott before I ask him my final question? We're good? Okay, fantastic.
I will repeat the same question, or in the vein of the same question I asked you last time. And assuming that you might have a different answer, what do you think is the most, I don't know, what are you most excited about right now? Because now there's all these new things that are developing, and we're sort of about to take a lot of steps forward.
So the thing that is really exciting to me about Perseverance in particular, I think is really exciting to me, is we're laying the foundations for Mars sample return. So Perseverance is going to pick up some samples from Mars and store them on board, and then later on, another rover will come and collect those samples, and we'll take them back to a craft that will boost them into orbit. And then another spacecraft will come along, grab that out of Martian orbit, and bring it back to Earth. So we are actually going to bring pieces of Mars on purpose that we know where they came from. We're going to bring them all the way back to Earth. And Perseverance is the first kind of step in that chain. And to me, that's really super exciting. Scientists are still, decades after, we're 50 years after the last Apollo mission, and scientists are still studying and learning things from the rock samples that Apollo brought back from the moon. And this is going to be the same kind of thing. The untold numbers of PhDs are going to be minted out of the samples that end up coming back from Mars through this chain of missions. And I find that exciting. What are we going to be able to tell about Mars that we can't tell from the laboratories that we sent there? This is the reason why we sent science instruments to Mars, is that, we couldn't bring Mars back here. We had to send our science instruments there. And now we're able to actually bring Mars, pieces of Mars back to Earth and study them with instruments that we have here on Earth. So I find that very exciting. I think that's a really exciting step forward in solar system exploration.
3 separate missions, you said. So one to pick the rock up, one to put them into orbit, and then one to snatch them.
That's right. And this is the reason people have talked about Mars sample return missions for a long time. And this is the reason why it never actually happened, why the missions never actually happened, because the concept was, If you send a mission to Mars to like scoop up a rock and bring it back, and you do that all in one mission, and it doesn't actually bring the rock back, then that mission is a failure. No matter what else it accomplishes, everybody's going to see it as a failure. And it took a long time for them to get the fairly genius idea of breaking it up into pieces, and so that the individual pieces can be successes and have other things, and each of them is just kind of like doing this like link in the chain kind of approach. That's how Mars.
Why fail once when you could fail 3 times?
I love that optimism.
I have to ask, just because I'm curious, are you guys thinking about some sort of a device that comes down and scoops up that rock, or something getting onto the surface and lifting back off into space?
Yeah, my understanding of that mission is that it will bring a small rover. The small rover will go, and among doing a science of its own, it will go and like grab the sample cache that was left by Perseverance and put it on the spacecraft that will boost it back to orbit. So that's how that piece will look. And then you have a rover that can like drive around and do other science that's still sitting on the surface.
I guess it's more feasible because the atmosphere is so thin, it won't take that much energy to get back into space.
It's thinner and also a lower gravity, right? Thinner atmosphere, lower gravity. And so on Earth, you're fighting a stronger gravity and you're having to push your way through more atmosphere on your way back up. So that will be an advantage. A disadvantage, of course, is you have to send all the fuel that it's going to need for that ascent. You have to send it with it to Mars. So it has to get to Mars and like have all that fuel left over. And there are a whole bunch of other things that we don't know about how to send a spacecraft to another planet and like boost it off the planet, get it back to the sky, get it back to orbit. But that's what exploration is for, is you figure this stuff out and you learn these things and you kind of make it up as you go. So there's a lot of fascinating engineering to be done there.
Awesome. We've got
failures.
Go ahead, Ash.
Do I recall that there was I don't know if it was a mission to Mars or if it was some other planet that something was supposed to fly by and ended in a fiery crash because somewhere along the line they had used English units instead of metric.
Yeah, that is Mars Climate Orbiter. And what happened with Mars Climate Orbiter is that it was a NASA spacecraft that was being operated by a partner, by Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin was basically doing computations and sending them back to Earth. Like, this is how much thrust you should, because Earth was actually sending the command, NASA, JPL was actually sending the commands to the spacecraft, but all the work was being done to like decide what commands to send to the spacecraft was being done at Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin was basically sending these numbers to JPL, and JPL navigators were looking at it like, are you sure that's the right number? That doesn't seem right to me at all. And Lockheed was like, yeah, those are the right numbers. Send that to the spacecraft. So they, did what they were told, and they sent it to the spacecraft. And it turns out that they basically, burned up on the way into the atmosphere because the measurements that were being set were foot-pounds instead of what they were contractually obliged to send, which was the metric unit of newtons. And the difference between them is like a factor of 6 or something. It like wasn't even close. So yeah, they totally screwed the pooch on that. But the one of the lessons that we got out from that. So first of all, this was a kind of management-y mix-up. That like you were sending bare units from one team to another team, and like the teams were kind of like separated physically and separated kind of culturally, if you like. And there wasn't a lot of communication about this, and there wasn't anything clearly labeled anywhere that said what units they were in. And so one of the lessons we learned from that is the rover driving software that I helped to write for the rovers, and it's still in use today, is really obsessive about units, and it always tells you what units you're using. And it doesn't even give you the option of using non-metric units. That isn't even in the software. It's all metric all the time. But yeah, you have the story basically right. That's almost exactly what happened, and it was a super shameful and embarrassing failure. That like with any failure like that, you really want to try to learn the lessons of, so you never want to repeat a thing like that.
I'm guessing you guys don't work with Lockheed much anymore.
Well, I worked with some people at Lockheed that I thought were really sharp and that I really liked a lot. And they still do missions. I mean, I think they built Insight. So they've got an operating rover on the surface today. If you want to go to an outside contractor, there aren't too many companies that will do things like that for you. And Lockheed Martin is one of the few. And they've had, and we shouldn't focus on the Mars Climate Orbiter failure as if it were the only thing that they had ever done. I mean, they've had an enormous number of successes in the space program that go along with that, which is the reason they keep getting jobs. If you have a baseball player who steps up to bat and hits 9 balls out of the park, and the 10th one swings and misses, you still send him back to the plate, right? You don't say like, that's it, we're done with you. So,
right. But the pool for contractors, is it widening? I'm sorry, I could just think of more questions for you.
Absolutely,
constantly.
It's bigger than it's ever been, and that's one of the really cool things that's happened that SpaceX has unlocked. I have my issues with SpaceX, but
how do you feel about SpaceX?
I think that SpaceX has been amazing. SpaceX, lowering the cost of access to space is huge, and it's helped to grow this pool. To speak to Brian's point about, it's helped to grow this pool of companies that are able to do space stuff. Companies that are able to send up, microsatellites, or companies that have some kind of space experience. Like it's kind of helping to kind of spark this entire ecosystem. So I think very highly of that aspect of SpaceX. I am not real thrilled about their cavalier attitude towards safety, and the fact that they kind of they with their last launch, they basically told the FAA inspector they weren't going to launch and told him to go fly to Florida. And then that was on Saturday, I think. And then on Sunday night, they called him and said, hey, by the way, we're launching Monday morning. You better get back here. That doesn't, and he had to scramble to kind of get back, and, and they still blew up a rocket and, and spread this huge debris field over a wide area near where people live. Doesn't speak well of their culture of safety. Kim's dad is on a review board that reviews their crewed program and says that does much better. But I haven't really been impressed with all of the steps I've seen them take in rocketry. And so that's SpaceX. Elon Musk, who runs SpaceX, is one of many people in this world who would benefit from doing a lot of work on himself.
Oh, burn.
That is so well said.
Wow.
That is so well said.
Wow.
I mean, in many ways, I admire the guy, right? He built SpaceX and he made electric cars a thing, right? I sort of admire him for that stuff. But I have a friend who said, I wish someone else could do the things I wish that someone else could use Elon Musk's money to do the things that Elon Musk does. And I think that more or less incorporates it. I don't admire him as an individual, but I do admire his accomplishments. And I try to, it's helpful to separate those things.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah.
Speaking of Kim's dad, he's an astronaut, right? Or he was an astronaut? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, twice.
Twice.
He went to space. Kim's dad. Oh my God. Speaking of stories, Kim's dad grows up, wants to be an astronaut, and at the time, this is in the 70s. At the time, they were drawing their astronauts from the crew of combat pilots. So he goes and becomes a combat pilot and flies combat missions in Vietnam. Comes back. By the time he comes back, they don't want combat pilots anymore. Now they want scientists. So he goes to MIT and gets a PhD and comes back and invents the job of payload specialist on the space shuttle so that he can fly his instrument into orbit. And then goes up on STS-9 and once isn't enough times for him, I guess. So he goes back up on STS-45 a little while later. So yeah, it's really something when you work on Mars rovers and you're not necessarily the most impressive one in your family, as Kim is.
That's right.
Yeah, and I have this experience that I walk around, I'm a Mars rover driver. I usually win at conversation, but I'm nah, when it comes to him, I got nothing. He's been in his life, he's been a combat pilot, a biotech PhD, an astronaut twice, a commercial pilot, and a college professor. And most people in this world would be, and an entrepreneur. I left one out because he helped found the SpaceX, not SpaceX Prize. I'm forgetting the name. X Prize, the X Prize in space.
Wow.
So he's done all 6 of them. Most of us would be justifiably proud of ourselves if we had done any one of these things, and he's done all 6.
I love that. We have,
right, and his daughter's pretty cool too, I gotta say.
His daughter's amazing. Kim is a wonderful. Kim, we hope we will get to have on Gangstagrass.tv at some point in the future. Trade off the child care.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have
And have Scott back again, because obviously we could talk for a very long time with you.
Yeah.
We've been going for quite a while now, and I think we should make a part 2 at some point.
Yeah, we're definitely not through all the questions. So anybody who's in the chat, Scott Maxwell is at Mars Rover Driver on Twitter. So if we didn't get to your question, I'm very sorry, and you can absolutely, I'm volunteering you, Scott. You can tweet at Scott Maxwell at Mars Rover Driver, and ask your question that way. We have Schmody78, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, in the Twitch chat, who said it's so awesome that y'all have space exploration engineers with Gangstagrass. And I agree. I think that is really awesome. These are the kinds of conversations we like to have on Gangstagrass.tv.
Mutual fans.
That's right. That's right.
Collaboration Society.
My last question is, that's so cool.
That's so cool.
That's what I was going to say. Y'all are so cool.
And my last question is going to bring this whole thing full circle, because those who have been here this whole time, you remember that Scott mentioned that he was a double major, computer science and English. And we just sort of let that one slide. But as it happens, Scott has a lot of Shakespeare memorized. It is very impressive. This man
can I make a
knows
request?
his Shakespeare. I don't know if you can make a request.
This is the NPR game show moment. But what you don't know about him is we're going to play a little game called Name the Harry Potter book.
Okay, so Pharaoh can make a request, and my request is just that Scott recites something that he loves from Shakespeare, something that moves him deeply, that he cares about, that he wants to share with us.
That I can do. I'll do a sonnet, so it won't be very long.
Okay.
But,
no, the whole play. We want the whole play.
You want the whole play?
No. We don't have the time.
Watch it. I've got most of Hamlet memorized at this point. So, all right. So is it not with me, as with that muse stirred by a painted beauty to his verse, who heaven itself for ornament doth use, and every fair with his fair doth rehearse, making a couplement of proud compare with sun and moon and earth and sea's rich gems and April's firstborn flowers and all things rare that heaven's air in this huge rondure hems. Let me, true in love, but truly right, and then believe me, my love is as fair as any mother's child, though not so bright as those gold candles fixed in heaven's air. Let them say more than like of hearsay, well, I will not praise that purpose not to sell. Thank you.
You mess him up, don't you?
And
you mess him up.
If Dolio or Randy were here right now, one of them at least, probably Randy, would say, bars. Bars. Yeah.
Well, that's what Shakespeare was. Mars. I mean, I know we're wrapping up, but that's what Shakespeare was, right? Shakespeare was a rapper. If you were a Shakespeare, I've said this many times, if Shakespeare were alive today, he'd be a rapper. He was playing with language. He was working in an art form that was kind of derided because, the hoity-toity people kind of looked down on the theater even as they loved to go, but the common people really loved it. And he occupied the same kind of, and a lot of what he did wasn't written down for a long time because nobody thought it was really worth preserving. But there were these other people who really loved it and thankfully did sort of rescue it from the fire, literally and metaphorically. He's like, that's what he would be doing today. If he were alive, he'd be a member of Gangstagrass and he'd be spitting rap lyrics with the best of them.
Of course he would be. So I'm glad that you said Hamlet is you almost have Hamlet memorized, because I'm thinking of his speech when he is out in the tundra and he's about to head back to the castle and act a fool. I'm trying to remember a particular line from that speech. What are we but beast if we only sleep and feed?
Yes. Wait a minute. I can do it. What is a man? What is a man if his something be but to sleep and feed? I can't quite do it. I'm so sorry, Brian. I've let you down and let myself down.
No, you know what I'm talking about, so I'm happy.
I swear to God, what I feel really terrible about is this quote is on my refrigerator, and I'm gonna we're gonna stop this, and I'm gonna go.
What Shakespeare is this from?
Anyway, sorry.
I got one for you. What Shakespeare is this from? Dinner. You ate it. There is none left. It was salty with butter, and it was death. You proceeded to eat it because you was in the mood, but Holmes you did not read. It was a canned dog food.
I'm pretty sure that's from Measure for Measure. Act 3, Scene 2.
It's so real.
We too, Poet of Cornwall, look forward to the Gangstagrass Shakespeare cover.
I feel like that's the thing, a lot of the time you've got to be explaining things to people about Mars that you wish that they understood, or misconceptions you have to clear up. But I feel like that's the thing about Shakespeare is you have to get past the language of the time, which is why I appreciate that you recited that with emotive accuracy.
Thank you.
Because they're the concepts are often just so body and base and human, right? And he's
Absolutely.
really Wrench is joking, you accidentally ate dog food, but Shakespeare 100% has written something about you accidentally ate dog food, and it's flowery and it's clever, but he definitely wrote stuff like that. He did.
It's not quite what they try to teach you in high school. And by the way, Brian, what is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? There we go.
Yes, that's the whole quote.
Real talk. Dropping gems here. We'll wrap it up with that.
That's right.
Thank you.
So
it's so great to see y'all again. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I gotta go sleep and feed now. So
just make sure it's not the chief good and market of your time.
Hey, appreciate that, man.
It's such a pleasure to have Scott Maxwell at Mars Rover Driver on Twitter and Instagram here with us, talking about all these amazing stories from his time driving the Mars Rover. And of course, we have tomorrow at 3 p.m. Wrench, is that you tomorrow at 3 p.m.?
Yeah.
Yes, we have the Wrench set tomorrow at 3 p.m. at gangstagrass.tv. We will probably have something on Tuesday. Next week on Gangstagrass TV is going to be a little bit different, folks. Next week and the week after, you are going to see us all together in one place for the first time. And that place, Scott Maxwell, is going to be Pasadena. So, we look forward to seeing you all at gangstagrass.tv tomorrow at 3, and then next week and the week after, when we're going to do some wild stuff. We might show up at times you're not expecting us, so make sure that you have hit that little heart on Twitch to follow and make sure that it tells you when we're on, because it could be any time. Yeah, that's right, Kath. We are going nuts next week.
We might not even be able to do the multicast. We might not be able to do Facebook and YouTube necessarily, so it might just be Twitch. Some of this stuff. Some of them, I mean, the little pop-up ones. I don't know.
We'll see. And it's possible that that this coming Friday's time might shift a little bit as well. So stay tuned. We'll let you know on our socials what's going on to the best of our ability. Scott Maxwell at Mars Rover Driver, thank you so much.
It is equally an honor and a pleasure. I rarely say that.
Likewise. It's great to see y'all again. Y'all stay well.
You too.
Everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good one, Scott. Everybody.
You too. Bye.